The sound came first, not a scream, not a voice. Just that thin, repeating beep that turns a hospital hallway into a tunnel where nobody knows what to do with their hands. Beep, 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 beep. The lights overhead were too bright and too clean, like the building didn't believe in shadows. The air smelled like disinfectant and cold metal, with a faint hint of something overheated, like plastic that had been pushed too far. Every few seconds, a door opened somewhere down the corridor, and warm air rushed out, carrying the low hum of machines and hurried voices that tried not to sound frightened. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors stayed shut, not locked, not guarded, just closed, the way a verdict closes. On the wall beside them, a small sign read, "Pediatric Critical Care," and beneath it sat a row of chairs that were never meant to be comfortable. Nobody sat. Not really. People leaned, stood, paced, hovered like they were afraid that if they lowered themselves, something inside them would break. Derek Halstead stood closest to the doors. To the world, he was a billionaire. One of those men whose name ended up on buildings, whose handshake was treated like a currency, whose decisions moved markets and ruined weekends. His suit was tailored with quiet perfection, dark and simple, the kind that didn't need to show off because everyone already knew what it meant. But none of that mattered here. Here, he was just a father who had run out of ways to fix things. His tie was loosened. His hair had shifted out of place. His eyes were red at the edges in that particular way that comes from too much fear and too little sleep. He held his phone in his hand without looking at it, as if it were an object from a different life. Beside him stood a cluster of doctors and administrators, their badges catching the fluorescent light. They spoke in careful tones. They kept their shoulders composed. They traded looks that lasted a fraction too long, like people trying to coordinate a storm. A senior doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Halstead," he began, the voice practiced and gentle. "We're doing everything we can." Derek didn't look at him. His gaze stayed on the doors. "That's what people say," Derek replied. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been speaking into a wind all night. "That's what people say when they've already started preparing an explanation." A second doctor stepped forward, younger, trying to look confident. "We're monitoring—" "Don't!" Derek cut in. He finally turned, and the hallway seemed to shrink under the force of his stare. "Don't give me words! Give me my son!" A silence followed, heavy and awkward. Somewhere behind the doors, the beep changed rhythm. It sped up for a moment, then steadied again, like a breath that didn't know whether it would return. That was when Caleb Mercer moved in. Caleb had been Derek's right hand for years, not just in business, but in life. The friend who always appeared at the right moment with the right solution. The man who knew which meetings Derek could skip and which ones would cost him millions. The man who had been in family photos more times than some relatives. Caleb wore a suit too, but his looked softer, easier, like he wanted you to trust him. He placed a calm hand on Derek's shoulder. "Derek," he said quietly, close enough that it sounded intimate. "Breathe. You need to stay steady." Derek's jaw flexed. "My baby is in there," he whispered. The word baby sounded strange on a man like him, like it had lived in a part of his life no one had ever been allowed to see. "Steady doesn't matter." Caleb nodded slowly, like he understood, like he felt it too. "It does," he said, "because if you push them, they'll lock down. They'll get defensive. Let them work. Give them 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Derek stared at him as if trying to recognize a face he'd known for years. The hallway reflected in Caleb's eyes for a second. Bright and clinical, and Derek looked away like the reflection hurt. Behind them, a woman in a crisp blazer spoke in a measured tone to another administrator. A clipboard tilted. A pen hovered. Words like protocol and risk and liability moved through the air like smoke nobody wanted to breathe in. And while all of that happened, almost no one noticed the cleaning cart rolling into the corridor. Its wheels squeaked every time they crossed a seam in the tile. Rosa Alvarez pushed it like she'd pushed 1,000 carts before. Her uniform was plain, neutral colored. Her hair was tied back tight. Her hands were raw at the knuckles, the skin dry from chemicals and work. Beside her walked a little girl, maybe 10, holding the sleeve of Rosa's uniform as if letting go would make her disappear. Sophia. She had big eyes that didn't miss much. She didn't chatter. She didn't run ahead. She watched the hallway the way kids watch adults when something is wrong, trying to learn the rules fast enough not to get hurt. Rosa slowed when she saw the crowd near the double doors. She kept her posture small, her expression calm, because that was what life had taught her. In places like this, being invisible was safer than being seen. A nurse rushed past, and without even looking directly at Rosa, snapped, "Clean up near pediatric critical. Now, make it presentable." Presentable. Rosa swallowed the word like a stone. She nodded once and pushed forward. Sophia squeezed her mother's sleeve tighter. The closer they got, the colder the air felt, not in temperature, but in emotion. Fear has a way of cooling rooms. It tightens voices. It sharpens footsteps. It turns everything into edges. Rosa parked the cart against the wall just outside the cluster of doctors. She reached for gloves, for cloths, for the small rituals of cleaning that gave her hands something to do while her mind did something else, and her mind was listening. Not like gossip, like survival. She heard fragments. Not responding. Time window. Complications. She heard a phrase that made her stomach turn because she'd heard it before in other places, in other lives. Prepare the family. Rosa's face didn't change. Her hands kept moving. But inside her, something tightened, the way a mother's body tightens when she senses danger near a child. Sophia peeked around Rosa's shoulder, trying to see what everyone was staring at. She caught a glimpse when the doors opened for a second and a stretcher moved through, covered in a small blanket that barely rose. A tiny bundle. Sophia's throat closed. She didn't understand medicine, but she understood stillness. She looked up at her mother, eyes wide, silently asking the only question children know how to ask in moments like this. Is he going to be okay? Rosa didn't answer with words. She only pressed her hand over Sophia's fingers. A quiet squeeze that said, "Stay close, stay quiet, watch." Derek's voice rose again, cracking against the polished air. "You keep telling me to wait," he said. And there was something in his tone that wasn't just anger. It was the sound of a man feeling powerless for the first time. "You keep telling me to give you time. Tell me what you're not saying." The senior doctor's expression tightened. "We're saying," he replied carefully, "that your son is very fragile right now." "Fragile," Derek repeated. "He's a baby. Of course he's fragile." Caleb stepped in again, his voice soft, soothing, always soothing. "Derek," he murmured, "don't do this here. Let's step aside." Derek didn't move. He looked past Caleb, past the doctors, and for the first time, his gaze landed on Rosa and Sophia. Maybe it was because Sophia's eyes were fixed on him, unafraid in the way kids sometimes are when they don't yet know who they're supposed to be scared of. For a heartbeat, Derek's face shifted. Not the billionaire, just a father seeing another mother with a child clinging to her. "Who are you?" Derek asked, not harshly, almost quietly. Before Rosa could speak, a doctor snapped. Too sharp, too fast. Sir, they're staff. They're not part of this. Sophia flinched at the tone. Rosa lifted her chin slightly. Her voice came out calm, respectful, but steady. I'm here to clean, she said. That's all. Derek studied her for a moment as if he could see, behind the uniform, the kind of life she'd had. Then the doors opened again, and everyone turned. A nurse hurried out, eyes tight, and spoke quickly to the doctors. The words were too quiet for Derek to catch, but Rosa heard something she shouldn't have. A name. Not Derek's, not the baby's, Caleb's. The nurse leaned in close, and Caleb's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Not fear, not sadness, something else. A look like someone checking whether a plan was still on schedule. And Rosa noticed something that made her skin prickle. A clipboard angled away from Derek, shielded like a secret. A timestamp covered by a thumb. A pen pausing at the line where truth becomes permanent. Rosa had seen that kind of movement before. Not here. Not in hospitals. But in places where mistakes were hidden because admitting them would cost too much. Sophia shifted beside her, and a cloth slipped from the cart, landing softly on the floor. A man in a white coat turned sharply. "Hey!" he barked, louder than necessary. "She can't be here." Rosa bent quickly and picked it up. "I'm sorry," she said, because that's what the world expects from women like her, even when they haven't done anything wrong. The doctor's eyes narrowed. "This is a critical area. Do your job and don't interfere." Interfere. Sophia's cheeks burned. She looked at her mother like she wanted to say something, like the injustice was too big to hold inside a child's chest. Rosa didn't let her. She simply placed a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder, anchoring her. And then Rosa did something small, almost invisible. Her fingers slipped into her pocket, touching the worn edge of a little notebook she kept there. The spine was cracked from use. The pages held writing so small and careful you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Sophia had asked about it once. Rosa had only said, "It helps me remember." Now, in this hallway, it felt heavier than paper. Derek's phone buzzed in his hand. He ignored it. His whole world was behind those doors. And if you've ever stood outside a room where someone you love was fighting for air, you know what that does to you. It makes you desperate for any certainty. It makes you cling to any voice that sounds confident. It makes you trust the wrong people if they sound like they've done this before. Caleb leaned close to Derek again, voice low, gentle. "Let's talk," he said. "There are things we need to prepare for." Derek stared at him. "Prepare for what?" he asked. Caleb's mouth opened, then closed, like he was choosing a softer lie. Rosa watched that exchange and her stomach sank, because she realized something with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with medicine. Someone in this hallway wasn't just afraid of losing a baby. Someone in this hallway was afraid of the baby living. And if you're listening right now, stay with me. Because what happens next isn't about money or hospitals or paperwork. It's about a mother in a uniform no one respects, and a little girl who sees too much, and a man who's about to learn that the person who saves his son might be the very person he never once bothered to look at. The double doors cracked open again. A sliver of light spilled out, and in that sliver, Sophia caught a glimpse she wasn't supposed to see. A doctor's phone screen flashing an outgoing call, a signature line on a form, and Caleb's name printed in bold at the top of a page that wasn't medical at all. Sophia's breath caught. Rosa felt it too, even without seeing it clearly. That sharp mother instinct certainty that something was wrong. And in that moment, Rosa understood the truth that would change everything. If she stayed invisible, the baby might not make it. The door cracked open again, and the sound that spilled into the corridor wasn't just voices. It was a surge. Shoes squeaking on polished floor, a metal tray clinking, a clipped "now," a sharper "no, hold on." And underneath it all, that relentless electronic beep trying to keep the whole world steady. Derek Halstead moved on instinct, the way a father moves toward trouble, even when his legs are heavy with fear. He stepped forward like his presence could change the air inside that room, like being seen could somehow become a kind of medicine. He barely reached the threshold before a hand rose in front of him. Not violent, not dramatic, just firm, practiced, and polite in the way polite can feel like a lock. "Mr. Halstead, please," the security officer said, voice level, eyes trained to stay respectful without staying human. "You can't go in right now." Derek stared at the arm like it didn't belong in his reality. "I'm his father," Derek said. The words came out low and dry. "That's my son." "I understand," the officer replied, and the phrase sounded like something memorized in training. "They need space. It's protocol." Behind the officer, the medical board's representatives hovered like an extra wall. A woman with her hair pulled back tight. A man with tired eyes and an expensive watch. Another doctor whose face was so controlled it looked almost carved. "Mr. Halstead," the woman said. Not unkind, but not soft either. "We need a clear environment, please." Clear environment. Clear for whom? Derek took another step, and the officer matched him. A mirror with a badge. For a second, the absurdity hit hard enough to sting. Derek could buy buildings. He could buy silence. He could buy time on any calendar he wanted. But he couldn't buy the right to cross a painted line on a hospital floor. Caleb Stokes arrived at Derek's shoulder like he'd been standing there all along. Calm suit, calm voice, calm hands. 5 minutes, Caleb murmured. The way someone negotiates a business problem on a conference call. Just give them 5. If you push right now, they freeze up. You know how institutions are. Don't make them defensive. Derek's jaw flexed. He didn't look at Caleb at first. He looked straight at the narrow gap in the door, at the flash of white coats moving too fast, at the sense that something fragile was being handled by people who had practiced detachment like it was a craft. 5, Derek said finally, though it sounded less like agreement and more like surrender. The door swung shut again, sealing him out like he was a stranger. Down the corridor, Rosa pushed her cleaning cart with steady hands. She wore neutral scrubs and a simple badge that didn't open the important doors. Her hair was tucked under a cap. Her shoes were practical and quiet. The hospital called her when something spilled or something needed to look spotless for someone who mattered. Today it wasn't a spill. A nurse hurried by and gestured with her chin. "We need that area clean. Now! There's mess from the rush." Rosa nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Sophia stayed close to her mother's side, small enough to disappear between adult hips and swinging coats. Her fingers clung to Rosa's sleeve with that particular grip children use when the world feels too big and too sharp. Everything in this corridor was bright and cold. The floor was so shiny it looked wet even when it wasn't. The overhead lights made every surface glare. The air smelled like antiseptic and something metallic, and the chill felt intentional, as if the building itself wanted to keep emotion from growing. Rosa parked the cart against the wall and started wiping, moving on autopilot. Spray, cloth, tight circles, straight lines, clean again, clean again. But her eyes weren't on the floor. They were on hands, on faces. On the way people spoke when they were trying not to be heard. A doctor passed close enough for Rosa to catch a fragment. "It's still climbing." Another voice, strained. "The fever isn't breaking." Someone else, too quiet, almost swallowed. "Not responding." Rosa's cloth paused mid-air for half a second. It wasn't shock that crossed her face. It was recognition. The kind that comes from a mind that has seen patterns, learned them, fought them, and never fully let them go. Her pocket brushed her thigh as she moved, and she felt the edge of her small notebook there. A worn little thing. Bent corners. Pages filled with tight handwriting that had never been meant for anyone else's eyes. Sophia had asked once why she kept it. Rosa had said, simple and careful, "So I don't forget what matters." In this corridor, what mattered felt like it was slipping away behind a locked door. The door opened again, only a crack, and Sophia saw something that made her breath catch. She didn't see a face. She didn't need to. She saw a thin blanket, too light for this kind of emergency, wrapped around a small body being moved quickly from one set of hands to another. She saw dampness along the baby's hairline, the shine of heat. She saw how limp the little arm looked for a beat too long. And she felt, in her child's bones, that it wasn't normal. No one said it out loud. No one had time for "it's going to be okay." They spoke in numbers and terms. They spoke like people who could explain a storm without stopping the rain. Rosa watched the way the baby was held for a second, how careful, and yet how rushed, how certain, and yet how delayed. She watched the quick, clipped movements of people who were trying to keep control, and she saw something underneath all of it that didn't sit right. Not incompetence, something worse, a choice. Derek shifted closer to the door again, drawn like a tide. The security officer lifted his hand once more, and Derek's eyes flared with the kind of helplessness that humiliation creates. The medical board woman stepped out into the corridor. "Mr. Halstead, please. We need you to wait." Derek's voice cracked at the edges despite how hard he tried to keep it steady. "Wait for what?" "For stabilization," she said, and her gaze slid away quickly, like eye contact might turn into a promise she couldn't keep. Caleb stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Derek and the people in coats. He spoke gently, like he was shielding Derek from pain. "Let them do their job," Caleb said. "You being upset doesn't help. Stay calm. Give it a minute." Derek looked at Caleb, desperate for something solid, and Caleb gave him a smile that looked warm to an untrained eye. To someone watching closely, it looked managed. A sudden clatter broke the corridor's tight rhythm. A thermometer, forgotten on a tray set down too fast, slid and dropped to the floor with a sharp plastic snap. Heads turned. A single second of attention wasted. A young doctor snapped his gaze toward Rosa and Sophia, irritation rising like steam. "Hey, you can't be here." Rosa bent quickly, picked up the thermometer with care, and held it out toward the nearest nurse. "I'm sorry, it fell." The doctor didn't take it. The nurse did. The doctor's eyes went over Rosa the way some people look at a stain they don't want to acknowledge. "This is a critical area," he said, louder than necessary. "Do your job and don't get in the way." Sophia's cheeks burned. Her eyes flashed with the instinctive anger of a child who knows when her mother is being treated as less than human. Rosa didn't plead. She didn't argue. She simply lowered her head enough to end the confrontation without shrinking her spine. But her hand tightened around Sophia's. That grip held love, yes, and something else too. A warning. Derek saw the moment. Just a flash across the corridor. A woman in a plain uniform, a little girl swallowed by fluorescent light. The way humiliation can arrive quietly and still leave bruises. Derek's mouth opened as if to say something corrective, something powerful, something that could restore dignity with a single sentence. Caleb was quicker. "It's fine. Caleb said to the doctor, smiling politely, voice smooth. "They're just nervous. Let's not waste time." Waste time. Time was the only thing anyone here seemed to worship. The doctor relaxed, reassured by someone who looked like he belonged to Derek's world. He turned away. And just like that, Rosa and Sophia were erased again, tidied out of the story like they were part of the mess. If your stomach twisted at that, if you felt that hot little sting behind your ribs, hold on to it. Stick with this. Because the people who get treated like they're invisible always pay first, and it's about time somebody paid attention. If you've ever watched someone swallow unfairness just to survive, stay close and let me know you're here. And if you already sense that something isn't just wrong, but planned, type one word, justice, so I know you see it too. Rosa resumed wiping, slower now, like she was controlling her breath on purpose. Sophia stared at the floor, blinking hard, fighting tears not because she wasn't hurt, but because she didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it. A few steps away, Caleb angled himself toward a doctor who kept glancing at his phone too often. This doctor had the posture of someone who made decisions quickly and hated questions even more. Caleb's voice dropped into that private tone people use when they believe they're safe. "You're sure you're following the right flow?" Caleb asked. The doctor's shoulders tightened. "We're within protocol." "Derek can't suspect anything," Caleb said, still calm, still controlled. The phrase sounded like it belonged in a boardroom, not a hospital. "Keep it clean." The doctor looked toward the closed door, then away. "We're doing what we can." Caleb tilted his head slightly. "We just need to buy time." Buy time. Rosa's cloth stilled again. People trying to save a baby don't talk about buying time like it's a commodity. They talk about urgency. They talk about hope. They talk about doing everything. Buying time sounded like waiting for something else. Rosa kept her face neutral, but something behind her eyes turned sharp. Her fingers brushed the edge of her notebook in her pocket, the way a person touches an anchor when the ground starts moving. A nurse stepped closer, different from the others. Softer eyes, human eyes. She wasn't young enough to be naive, and she wasn't old enough to be numb. She glanced at Sophia and saw instantly that this wasn't just a child in a hallway. This was a child holding herself together. "Hey," the nurse said gently, keeping her voice low. "You two, come here. Stand in this corner. You're okay. Just don't cross that line." She pointed at the faint tape mark on the floor. A boundary nobody explained, only enforced. Then she offered Sophia a small paper cup of water. Sophia took it with both hands, as if it were warmth itself. "Thank you," Sophia whispered. The nurse turned to Rosa and noticed the worn notebook bulging slightly at her pocket. Her gaze flicked to it, then back to Rosa's face. "You've worked in hospitals before?" the nurse asked, not accusing, just curious. Rosa hesitated. She had learned long ago that the wrong truth told to the wrong person can turn into punishment. "I studied some," Rosa said quietly. She didn't add more. The nurse didn't force it. She just nodded once, like she understood there were histories people carried that didn't belong in a hallway. Across the corridor, Derek paced 2 steps and stopped. 2 steps and stopped. His hands curled and uncurled, as if he were trying to squeeze control back into his body. The wedding ring on his finger caught the fluorescent light. On the other hand, a pale mark showed where another ring used to be. Widower. That grief sat in his face like a shadow he couldn't shake, even when he forced his voice to be firm. "Let me in," he said again, quieter this time. Not as an order. As a plea he hated himself for needing. The medical board man with the expensive watch stepped out. "Mr. Halstead, we need you to wait." "How long?" Derek asked. The man's answer was measured, practiced. "A few minutes." Derek let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. That's what everyone says when they don't know. Caleb stepped close, hand landing lightly between Derek's shoulder blades. Guiding, steering. "Look at me," Caleb said, soft, supportive. "You can't fall apart. Your son needs you steady." Derek closed his eyes for a second. He nodded like a man being coached through his own nightmare. And while the adults negotiated power and protocol, Sophia began to move. It wasn't rebellion, it was gravity. A child follows the sound of suffering the way a person follows a cry in the dark. Rosa turned her head for a moment to swap out a cloth. For one brief moment, her hand wasn't wrapped around Sophia's. Sophia took 2 silent steps away. She slipped past shoulders and coats small enough to be overlooked. She followed the echo of urgent voices down a side corridor where the traffic thinned. There, the hospital looked different. Less polished, more practical. A supply alcove, a stainless steel sink, a faucet with a steady drip that sounded loud in the quiet, a stack of towels, a small bin of melting ice, a forgotten thermometer on the counter like the one that had just fallen, another piece of plastic waiting to matter. Sophia stopped, heart thudding. Her fingers touched the cold metal edge of the sink as if it could steady her. Then she saw, through a partially open door, a glimpse of the baby again. Not a face, not fully, just the thin blanket, the tiny body, the damp heat on the skin, the way hands adjusted and repositioned, and for 1 second, no one was fully watching because everyone was busy being busy. A sound slipped out of the baby, weak, small, barely there. But it hit Sophia like a bell. She didn't understand medicine. She didn't know protocols. She knew one thing: when someone is burning with fever, you do something. You don't stand back and let time swallow them. Her mind flashed back to being little, sick on a couch, Rosa's hand on her forehead, cool and gentle, whispering, "Breathe with me. Stay with me." Sophia looked at the dripping faucet. She looked at the towels. She looked at the baby, and something inside her, something brave and simple, started to form. Back in the main corridor, Rosa lifted her head. Sophia wasn't there. First came confusion, quick and sharp, then a cold emptiness. "Sophia?" Rosa called, low, trying not to draw attention. No answer. Rosa's eyes scanned the hallway, left, right, past the security officer, past the closed door, past Derek and his expensive grief, past Caleb and his calm. And then Rosa heard it. Caleb's voice again, close to the complicit doctor, so soft it was almost swallowed by the hum of machines. "Today it ends," Caleb said. Rosa felt the phrase land in her body like a weight. Ends what? The baby's fight? Derek's hope? Or somebody's plan finally succeeding? Rosa stepped forward, leaving the safe corner the nurse had offered. Her hands trembled. Not with fear for herself, but with the kind of panic only a mother knows. Panic that has nothing to do with dignity and everything to do with a child gone missing. In the side corridor, Sophia took one more step toward the open door. In the main corridor, Rosa took one more step away from her cart. 2 movements, happening at the same time, pulling the story toward a point of no return. And in that terrible, quiet second, Rosa still didn't know where her daughter was, but the hospital, bought, polished, hurried, and blind, was about to learn that courage doesn't always come in lab coats. Sometimes it comes in small hands. The beep didn't change, but the hallway did. It narrowed. Not in inches, but in feeling. The air seemed colder, the light whiter, the floor more reflective, like the building was trying to make everything look clean enough to hide what was happening behind that door. Somewhere inside, a voice said it, flat and heavy. He's not responding. It wasn't a medical sentence in that moment. It was a verdict hanging in the air, turning every small sound into something cruel. Shoes squeaked, a cart rattled, a door latch clicked, and that beep kept its steady rhythm like time was proud of itself. Derek Halstead stood with his hands empty. That was the part that looked wrong on him. A man like Derek was used to holding things, a phone that never stopped ringing, a pen that could move money across continents, a steering wheel in the dark when he needed to drive fast enough to forget. Now he held nothing. He stared at the closed door the way a person stares at water when someone they love is under it. His chest rose and fell, controlled, too controlled, as if he was afraid that if he breathed wrong, he would shatter. "Tell me what's happening," he said to the nearest doctor who stepped into the corridor. The doctor didn't meet his eyes for more than a heartbeat. "We're assessing. We're stabilizing." "What does that mean?" Derek asked. "It means we need time," the doctor answered, already shifting away. "Time. Again." Derek's voice thickened. "How much?" A different figure, one of the board members, stepped forward with that careful hospital authority that sounded like policy and felt like distance. "Mr. Halstead, we understand you're distressed." Distressed. That word landed on Derek like a label someone was trying to stick on his forehead. "I'm his father," he said, quieter now, like the sentence was wearing down from use. "That's not distress. That's my son." The board member nodded, like he just heard a complaint from a client. "We need you to remain calm. Remain calm. Remain outside. Remain powerless." Caleb Stokes was close, the way shadow stays close to a body. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He didn't look frightened. He looked like a man managing a problem. He leaned in just enough to make it feel intimate, like friendship, like brotherhood. "You need to stay lucid," Caleb murmured. "Lucid." The word slid in quietly, but it did its work. It made Derek feel like emotion was a liability, like grief could become evidence against him. Caleb's hand hovered near Derek's elbow, not grabbing, just guiding, steering. "They need your decision," Caleb continued, turning his head slightly toward a tablet and a thin folder held by a nurse. "They're ready to move to the next step, but they can't without authorization. It's paperwork. It's all bureaucracy until someone signs." Derek looked at the folder like it was a trap hidden inside plain paper. "What am I signing?" he asked. Caleb's tone stayed soft. "An emergency authorization. It gives them autonomy. It keeps things moving. You don't want the system slowing down right now." It sounded reasonable. That was the scariest part. Derek's eyes drifted to the pen clipped to the folder. Something about it pulled him backward in time, the way certain objects do when grief hasn't finished chewing on your life. A pen, a signature, a name on a page. Less than a year ago, he had signed something in a different hospital corridor. He remembered the cold. He remembered the smell. He remembered how the fluorescent lights made his wife's skin look too pale. He remembered her voice, not dramatic, not poetic, just tired and real. She had been sitting on the edge of the couch at home weeks before, cradling a warm mug with both hands like she needed something steady. She smiled at him over the rim like the world wasn't heavy. "You're gonna be okay," Derek told her, trying to make it true. She laughed softly. "I'm not asking about me." Then she rested a hand on her belly, and her eyes got serious in a way that broke him even now. "Promise me," she said. He had leaned closer. "Anything." "Promise you'll stay with him," she whispered. No matter what happens, promise you won't let anyone turn you into a stranger to your own child." He had kissed her forehead. He had said the word like a vow. "I promise." The memory cut off like a film strip snapped. Derek blinked hard, and he was back in the hallway, staring at a door that wouldn't open for him, realizing how easily promises can be broken when the world decides you don't get a choice. He looked down. The pale mark on his left hand where a ring used to sit flashed under the lights. He hated that mark. He hated what it meant. He hated how it reminded him that money couldn't hold a person here. The beep kept insisting. Rosa felt it too, even from the edge of the corridor. That sound wasn't just a monitor to her, it was a language. It was urgency pretending to be calm. She stood beside her cart like she belonged there, like she was part of the furniture. Her uniform blended into the background. Her badge opened the supply closet, not the important rooms, but her eyes were awake. She watched the way people moved when they were afraid and trying to hide it. She watched the way the board spoke to Derek like he was a problem that needed to be contained. She watched Caleb's hand, always hovering near Derek, always there to redirect him. Rosa's fingers brushed the little notebook in her pocket just once, like checking that it still existed. She remembered a different hallway years ago when she wore a white coat for the first time and thought it meant the world would let her help people. She remembered the smell of old textbooks and cheap coffee. She remembered the way her eyes would burn from reading too long, how she'd trace diagrams with a pen until the ink stained her fingertips. She remembered the last month, the last stretch, the part where everyone around her started talking about futures like they were guaranteed. And then she remembered the text message she never received. Not the dramatic kind, not a breakup speech, just silence. She had been sitting on a curb outside a small building, her belly heavy with a baby that would arrive before she was ready. Phone in her hand, screen lit, then dim, then lit again. She watched the tiny word that told you someone had seen your message. Seen and never answered. That was how her life split in two. One version of her walked into exams. The other version of her walked into a job interview for cleaning floors. She didn't lose what she learned. She lost the door that let her use it. Even now she studied when she could. Old books with broken spines. Notes folded tight and hidden like contraband. A notebook carried in her pocket like a secret heart. She wasn't dangerous because she could fight. She was dangerous because she could recognize when something didn't fit. And this hallway didn't fit. The nurse with kind eyes appeared again, moving fast. But her gaze found Rosa for a second. Just a second. But it mattered. It said, "I see you." Rosa didn't step too close. She didn't act like she belonged in the conversation. She asked a question the way someone asks about the weather. "How long has he been like that?" Rosa said, voice low. The nurse's mouth tightened. "Too long." Rosa held her expression still. They're letting time pass?" The nurse exhaled through her nose, the closest thing to a confession she could afford. "They don't let anyone question it. Not here. Not with him." Rosa nodded once, as if accepting an answer about a broken faucet. But her mind held onto it like a piece of evidence. Then she saw it. The doctor Caleb had spoken to earlier stepped out from a side room, and he moved like someone who didn't want to be caught moving. His hand slid something into his coat quickly, too quickly. An envelope maybe, a folded sheet, something that wasn't supposed to be visible. His eyes flicked down the hall, then away. His jaw clenched. He walked faster than he needed to. Fear. Not of the baby, fear of being watched. Rosa's stomach turned. Hospitals had a rhythm, a logic. a kind of order that held even when people were panicking. This didn't feel like panic. This felt like chaos guided into a shape. Caleb turned back to Derek, and the switch in his expression was so smooth it was almost impressive. Warm concern, gentle voice, calm leadership. "You're doing the right thing," Caleb told him. Derek looked at him with that raw, aching need people have when they're drowning. "If I sign this, it helps?" Caleb's eyes softened. "It helps them act without delays." The board member stepped in, voice professional. "We need a decision, Mr. Halstead. Decision." Rosa's skin prickled. When the word decision arrives with pressure, it's rarely about care. It's about responsibility. It's about making sure someone else can later say, "You agreed." The nurse held the folder steady. The pen glinted. Derek's fingers hovered. His hand trembled once, a small betrayal of the control he was famous for. Somewhere inside, someone said, "We're losing ground." And Caleb leaned closer like he was saving Derek from falling apart. "Now," he murmured, "right now, if you're still here, if you can feel how wrong that sounds, don't look away. Stay with them. Say you're here in your own way, even if it's just a single word in the comments. Because people like Caleb count on silence to do half their work." Rosa glanced down instinctively. Sophia should have been right there, pressed against her side, fingers hooked around her sleeve. Sophia wasn't there. At first, Rosa's mind tried to make it harmless. A step to the left, a child shifting, a small wander in a crowded place. "Sophia," Rosa whispered. Nothing. Her throat tightened. Her heart lifted into her mouth. She turned her head, scanning the hallway. White coats, dark suits, security, doors, no small face, no bright eyes, no little hand. Rosa's voice sharpened, still quiet but threaded with panic. "Sophia." The nurse with kind eyes noticed the change in Rosa's posture immediately. "What is it?" "My daughter," Rosa said, the words coming out rougher now. I can't find my daughter." The nurse's eyes widened and she started to move, but a staff member stepped toward Rosa like a barrier. "Ma'am, you can't leave this area," he said. Rosa stared at him like he had lost his mind. "My child is missing." The staff member hesitated, caught between policy and humanity. And in that hesitation, Rosa saw how a system breaks people. It turns simple truths into inconveniences. On the other side of the corridor, Derek's fingers closed around the pen. Caleb angled his body, blocking Derek's view of anything else, keeping his world small and controlled. Rosa's eyes darted down the side hallway and her breath caught. Through the glass of a partially open door, through the bright, sterile light, she saw something small, a shadow, a little shape near a supply alcove, near a sink, near a place where no child should be and where every instinct in Rosa screamed that something irreversible could happen fast. Rosa took one step forward. The staff member started to reach for her, and the nurse, with kind eyes, looked torn, ready to choose sides. And at the exact same time, Derek lowered the pen toward the page. A father about to sign away his own questions. A mother about to sprint toward her missing child. A hospital holding its breath like it was waiting for the wrong thing to happen. Rosa kept her voice low at first, because even panic in that hallway had to ask permission. "Sophia." Nothing. She tried again, a little louder, and the name felt too small for the size of the building. The hospital swallowed it. Fluorescent lights hummed like they had no sympathy. The floor shined like a mirror meant to reflect authority, not fear. Rosa's eyes searched before her feet moved, left, right. Down the long corridor where suits stood like statues, past the double doors where the beep still insisted that time belonged to no one. Her cleaning cart sat behind her now, abandoned in the middle of everything, like a shed skin. That was the first line she crossed without thinking. She took 2 steps, then 3. Then she was walking too fast to look like a worker and too slow to feel like a mother who might be too late. "Sophia," she said again, sharper this time. Still nothing. A staff member stepped into her path with a hand held out flat, not angry, just coldly trained. "Ma'am, you can't go through there." Rosa stopped hard enough that her shoes squeaked. Her chest tightened. She didn't argue. She didn't lecture. She didn't demand respect. She pleaded, because there are moments when pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. "My daughter was with me," she said, and her voice broke on the last word like a bone that finally gave. "I turned for a second, just a second." The staff member's eyes flicked over her uniform, her badge, the invisible category he'd placed her into. "I understand," he said, but he didn't move. "This area is restricted." Restricted, like love needed clearance. Behind him, the hallway carried the sound of urgency without the look of it. People moved fast, but not frantic. They spoke quickly, but not kindly. That was what made it worse. If they had been screaming, it would have felt honest. This was controlled. And somewhere inside that control, a child had disappeared. Across the corridor, Derek stood with a pen in his hand, his fingers pale around it. He looked like a man being asked to sign a confession while his heart was still bleeding. Caleb stayed close enough to breathe Derek's fear and call it guidance. "You see what's happening?" Caleb murmured, his voice calm, like a blanket thrown over a fire. "We can't have interference. The team needs a clear environment. Every second matters." Derek's eyes snapped toward the direction of Rosa's voice, but Caleb angled his body, keeping Derek's focus locked on the folder. "If you sign, you protect your son," Caleb said. "You eliminate noise. You let them act." Noise. That's what he called a mother searching for her child. Derek's hand trembled, barely, like a truth trying to escape. Somewhere behind the closed door, that beep shifted. Not louder, not faster, just different enough that everyone in the corridor felt it in their skin. Now was not a word anyone said, but it was in every breath. If you like stories that squeeze the heart and refuse to let go until justice finds a way in, stay close, leave a like, and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. Rosa's gaze caught on the glass panel of a side corridor, and for a split second she saw it. A small silhouette. Not a full face, not a clear body, just the unmistakable shape of a child moving in a place where children did not belong. Her heart recognized it before her eyes could confirm it. "Sophia!" she called, and the name finally cut through the noise. The silhouette turned. It was her. Sophia's head whipped toward Rosa like a flower turning toward light, relief flashing across her face for one bright heartbeat. And then Sophia moved again, startled, slipping through a door that was not fully closed. A door marked with a sign Rosa didn't have time to read. Rosa lunged forward. Her foot hit the polished floor wrong, and for a terrifying instant, she almost went down. She caught herself on the wall, palms slapping cold paint, and the sting brought her back into her body. She pushed off, moving faster now, not caring what she looked like. A second staff member appeared as if the hospital had been waiting for this moment. "Ma'am, stop." Rosa didn't stop. She couldn't. A security guard stepped into view, larger than the others, not cruel, not screaming, just the system in a black uniform. The kind of man trained to see every movement as either allowed or not. "Ma'am," he said, firm, "you need to step back." Rosa's eyes were wild with one thought only. That's my daughter. The guard's gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the room Sophia had slipped into. The beep inside changed again, sharper, and even he flinched. He reached for his radio. At the same time, inside that too-white room, Sophia stood frozen. She hadn't gone in because she wanted trouble. She had gone in because she wanted adults, because she'd been lost in a corridor that felt like a freezer, and her mother's hand was suddenly gone, and the world had become too big. She'd followed sound the way children do, voices, footsteps, a word that kept repeating, baby, fast, temperature. She'd seen a nurse rush out and leave the door ajar. Sophia had stared at the crack of light like it was a path home. She slipped in because the room felt warmer than the hallway, even if it wasn't, because it felt like people were there. And then she saw the baby. Small. Too small. Swaddled in thin fabric that didn't look like enough. Skin flushed. Damp at the hairline. A tiny chest rising and falling with effort that didn't match how quiet the room had become. Sophia didn't know numbers. She knew heat. She stepped closer, eyes wide, breath held. She reached out and touched the baby's foot with one fingertip, just barely, like touching something holy. She snatched her hand back instantly. Too hot. Her stomach dropped. Her throat closed. She looked around for an adult, any adult. But the room was empty in the way a room gets empty when everyone believes they'll be gone only a second. A second. Seconds were what this hospital kept spending like they had unlimited supply. Sophia saw a call button and pressed it. Once, then again, harder. Nothing happened immediately. The beep continued, insistent, indifferent. Sophia's eyes landed on a sink, on disposable cloths stacked neatly, on paper towels, on a plastic cup. Her mother's voice drifted into her memory, not from a lecture, not from a lesson, just from one of those nights when Rosa studied quietly at the kitchen table and spoke under her breath. High fever in a baby is dangerous. Dangerous for real. Sophia didn't know what to do with dangerous for real. She only knew one thing a child knows better than anything else. When someone is burning, you try to cool the fire. She grabbed a cloth and ran it under water, fumbling with the faucet, fingers slipping on the handle. She wrung it out the way she'd wrung out washcloths at home, too hard, then not hard enough. It dripped. She hurried back, trembling. She laid the damp cloth gently on the baby's forehead, then lifted it and pressed it to the baby's little arm, like she could pull heat out with her hands. "I'm calling someone," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm right here. Please don't go." The monitor beep changed again. This time it was loud enough to pull people like magnets. The door flew open. A nurse burst in and stopped dead, eyes snapping to Sophia, then to the baby, then to the damp cloth. For half a second, the nurse's face held pure alarm, the kind that comes from seeing the unthinkable. "Oh my God," she said, not as a curse but as a prayer. "Who let you in here?" Sophia flinched so hard she almost fell backward. "I didn't mean to," she cried. "I was looking for my mom. He was hot. He was so hot." The nurse moved fast, but her hands were careful. She lifted the cloth away and guided Sophia back by the shoulders, not rough, not cruel, but urgent. "Sweetheart, step back now." Sophia's tears poured out, huge and silent at first, then loud with fear. "I didn't want to hurt him." The hallway erupted. Voices converged, footsteps slammed. A doctor appeared, then another. Someone said, "Security." Someone else said, "Contamination." Another voice snapped, "This is unacceptable." The words hit Sophia like stones. Unacceptable. As if she was a mistake, not a child. And outside the room, Caleb's eyes sharpened the moment he heard the commotion. He didn't panic, he calculated. Because chaos is a gift to a man who knows how to frame a story. Caleb turned slightly toward Derek, lowering his voice with practiced concern. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "Disruptions. People wandering in. It compromises everything. You don't want anyone blaming you for delays or interference." Derek's head snapped up. "What is that?" Caleb kept his tone smooth. "A security issue. They'll handle it. Stay here. Sign. Let them work." But Derek's body didn't listen. The moment that different beep hit his ears, something primal moved in him, a father's instinct that no money can replace. He took a step toward the noise. Caleb's hand reached out, trying to hold him in place. "Derek." Derek pulled away. "That's my son." He moved faster, passing staff, ignoring gentle protests, pushing through the small crowd forming like a wall. Rosa heard Sophia's cry, and it ripped through her like a blade. That sound didn't come from guilt, it came from terror. Rosa shoved forward, past the security guard, past the staff member who tried to block her. "Please," she said, voice raw. "That's my child." The nurse with kind eyes saw her and stepped aside. Just enough, just quick enough, making a choice without announcing it. Rosa crossed the threshold, and there it was, Sophia's small body shaking, held back by a nurse's careful grip. The baby in the center, surrounded by adults who suddenly acted like the room was theirs again. Rosa's breath caught. For a split second, the world tried to accuse her daughter. Then Rosa's mind did what it had learned to do long ago. It assessed, it noticed, it connected. She moved to the baby, not pushing people, not shouting, just stepping in with a gravity that made even trained professionals hesitate. She pressed 2 fingers lightly to the baby's forehead and felt the heat. Real heat! The kind that makes your chest tighten even if you don't know the exact reason. Her eyes lifted to the doctors, and Rosa asked a question so simple it landed like a hammer. Why didn't anyone try to bring the fever down sooner? The room went quiet for a beat, the way rooms do when a truth has stepped inside. A board member pushed in behind the doctors, face hard, voice sharpened by status. "Ma'am, you are not authorized to be here." Rosa didn't flinch. "I'm not giving orders," she said steady, even while her daughter sobbed behind her. "I'm asking a question." A doctor snapped, "This is not your place?" Rosa's gaze flicked to a clipboard on a counter, a note on a screen. A timestamp that didn't match what she'd heard in the hallway, a gap that felt too wide. Something didn't add up. She didn't say it out loud, not yet. But her face changed, and the nurse with kind eyes saw it. Derek reached the doorway at that moment, and the scene hit him like a punch. A little girl, crying, terrified. A mother, shielding her with her body, his baby in the center of it all, and adults who looked more offended than afraid. Derek froze for a breath, then stepped in. His eyes locked on Sophia, and something broke inside him. Not in a weak way, in a way that turned grief into fury. He looked at Rosa, at the trembling child, and then at the board. "What is going on?" he demanded, voice low, dangerous. Caleb arrived behind him like smoke trying to curl back around fire. "Derek, this is exactly..." Derek turned his head just enough to cut Caleb off. "What exactly was I about to sign?" Derek asked, holding up the folder like it was suddenly evidence. Caleb's smile arrived half a second late. It was the first time his mask slipped. A board member pointed toward Rosa like she was the problem that needed removal. "This woman needs to be escorted out," the board member said. "Immediately." The security guard stepped forward, Rosa pulled Sophia into her chest, wrapping her arms around her daughter like a shield, her body saying what her mouth didn't have time to. "You will not take my child." The guard lifted a hand, moving closer, and Derek raised his own hand, palm out, a single gesture that stopped the hallway like a lock clicking shut. Nobody yelled. Nobody threatened. Derek's voice was calm, and it made the command heavier. No one touches them. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a door closing on someone's plan. Caleb's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a new decision forming behind them. Because he understood something in that moment that the hospital staff didn't yet. The narrative was slipping. And when a man like Derek stops believing the story you've been feeding him, the next thing he does is start asking questions that can't be answered politely. Rosa held Sophia tighter, her own heartbeat pounding against her daughter's cheek. Sophia's sobs slowed, replaced by small shivers and a desperate grip. Fingers clenched into Rosa's uniform. Rosa looked at the baby once more, then at the faces around her. She didn't know the full web yet, but she could feel the pattern, and patterns once seen don't unsee. That night, Sophia didn't just wander into a restricted room. She wandered into the secret of an empire. Caleb didn't come back running. He came back immaculate. A fresh coffee in one hand, a slim folder in the other, his tie still perfectly centered, like the building itself had been designed to keep him clean. He walked through the corridor with the same calm you'd expect from a man arriving to cut a ribbon at a charity event. Not a man standing in the middle of a crisis. Beside him was a woman from hospital administration in a fitted blazer, badge clipped high, hair pinned back so tight it looked like it hurt. She carried a clipboard the way people carry authority when they don't have a soul involved. Caleb leaned in just slightly, speaking low enough to sound respectful, loud enough to be heard by the right people. "We're dealing with a serious incident," he said. "An unidentified child gained access to a critical unit. That exposes the hospital and it exposes the family." He said family like it meant protection. But the way his eyes moved told the truth. He meant ownership. "We need maximum discretion," Caleb added, soft as velvet. "No cameras, no staff gossip, no unnecessary reports outside the usual chain. Discretion." In that hallway, discretion meant control. If you like stories that leave you short of breath and then deliver justice when you least expect it, tap like and subscribe now, because you're going to want to see what this man does next. Down the corridor, Rosa sat in a small room that smelled like sanitizer and old paper. The walls were pale and bare, the kind of room where people confessed without meaning to. Sophia was in her lap, face pressed into Rosa's shoulder, her little body still shaking with leftover fear. Sophia didn't look like a troublemaker. She looked like a child who had tried to do something right and couldn't tell if the world was going to punish her for it. Rosa cupped her daughter's cheeks, turning Sophia's face gently until their eyes met. "Listen to me," Rosa said, voice steady even though her hands were trembling just enough to betray her. "You are not bad. You are not a problem." Sophia's eyes filled again. "I didn't want to hurt him," she whispered. "I know," Rosa said. "You were scared. You got lost. That's what happened." She held Sophia tighter, like she could press her back into safety through sheer force of love. The door opened, and the administrative woman entered with a form already clipped to her board, already written in language that felt like handcuffs. "Ma'am," the woman said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "I need you to describe what happened, then sign here." Rosa took the paper and read it. She didn't skim. She didn't nod. She read every line the way someone reads a threat disguised as policy. The words were cold. Incident, unauthorized entry, risk to patient, liability. Rosa's jaw tightened as she reached the part that described Sophia like an intruder. Rosa lifted her eyes slowly. "Who wrote this?" she asked. "It's standard," the woman replied. Rosa's voice stayed calm, but there was something sharp underneath it now. Whoever wrote this wasn't in that room. The administrative woman blinked as if she wasn't used to being challenged by someone in a janitor's uniform. In the hallway, Derek stood near the glass again, hands empty now, because the pen and folder had become something else in his mind. Not help, not protection, a trap he hadn't seen coming. He watched the movement around him, watched who spoke to whom, watched who gave orders and who obeyed. And for the first time, he noticed something that felt like a slap when it landed. Caleb wasn't supporting him. Caleb was directing the entire building. Doctors listened to him. Staff lowered their voices when he passed. Administration leaned toward him like he was the hospital's true owner. Derek caught the tail end of a conversation between Caleb and one of the board doctors, a man with a crisp coat and a face trained to show nothing. "We can't let this turn into a circus," the doctor said. Caleb nodded, composed. "I'll handle the father," Caleb replied. "You handle the rest." Derek's chest tightened. Handle the father. The phrase hit him in a place that money never reached. Because fathers weren't supposed to be handled. Fathers were supposed to be in the room. Fathers were supposed to hold their child and fight like hell. Derek stepped forward. "Why is she in a room?" he asked, voice low. Caleb turned with a practiced smile. "The kind you'd trust if you'd never been betrayed. She's not in trouble," he said smoothly. "It's protocol. We need documentation. You don't want a lawsuit on top of this, do you?" Derek stared at him. Caleb's words were all legal. Not one of them sounded like a baby. Inside the small room, Rosa set the form back on the table. "I'll sign when it's accurate," she said. The administrative woman sighed softly, as if Rosa were making things difficult. "Ma'am, this is just how it's done." Rosa leaned forward slightly. "Standard is not the same thing as true." The room went quiet. Rosa took a breath, then said the simplest request that could have prevented everything from becoming a lie. "I want to see the hallway cameras," she said. "Just that. My daughter went in because a door was left open." The administrative woman's eyes flicked away for a second, just a second, but Rosa saw it. "That requires authorization," the woman said. "Then ask," Rosa replied. The administrative woman shifted her weight. Uncomfortable now. She was used to people signing papers. She wasn't used to people asking for evidence. When the woman left, Rosa looked down at Sophia's hands. They were still damp, still smelled faintly of antiseptic and heat and fear. Rosa rubbed Sophia's fingers gently, as if washing the shame out of them. Out in the corridor, Caleb moved like a man closing doors quietly. He spoke to a security supervisor. He spoke to administration. He spoke to the board. Always low, always polite, always shaping a story. The story was simple. A worker's child got loose. A breach occurred. A fragile patient was endangered. The mother refused to cooperate. And the hospital, of course, had to protect everyone. Everyone except the people with the least power. Caleb entered the small room next, carrying his calm like a weapon. He crouched slightly to Sophia's level first, his smile warm enough to fool a camera. "You scared a lot of people today," he said softly. Sophia's eyes dropped. She shrank into Rosa's chest. Rosa's arm tightened around her daughter. Caleb stood and turned to Rosa, still cordial, still controlled. "I'm going to be practical," he said. "You work here. You understand. This is serious. A critical unit was compromised. If this becomes public, it doesn't just affect the hospital, it affects the family. Rosa didn't respond. She waited. Caleb continued, gentle as a threat disguised as kindness. I could request your removal immediately, he said. I could push for termination, but I don't want to ruin your life. He paused, letting the mercy hang in the air like a favor she hadn't earned. I just need you to cooperate. Rosa met his eyes. I cooperate with the truth, she said. Caleb's smile didn't disappear. It just got thinner. Great, he said. Then sign. And right there, in that small room with her daughter shaking in her lap, Rosa finally understood what kind of man he was. Not a man who shouted. A man who signed sentences with a smile. If you were watching this unfold and you had to answer honestly, would you trust that best friend, or would you already smell betrayal the moment he started talking about protocol? Rosa slid the paper back again. I'll sign after it's corrected, she said, and after I see the cameras. Caleb's eyes held on her like a lock. For a heartbeat, Rosa thought he might raise his voice, but he didn't. He simply nodded, as if she'd just confirmed what he already suspected. Then Rosa did something small, ordinary, and motherly, something no one could argue with. My daughter needs to wash her hands, she said quietly. The administrative woman returned with a staff member, and they guided Rosa and Sophia to a small restroom off the corridor. It was cramped and bright and smelled like bleach. Sophia stood on tiptoe at the sink, scrubbing too hard, as if she could erase the whole day by rubbing it away. Rosa watched her, eyes stinging. She kept her face calm for Sophia's sake, but her heart felt like it had been placed on the floor and stepped on. When Sophia finished, Rosa handed her a paper towel and wiped her fingers gently, slower now, the way you touch someone when you're trying to tell them you're still here. You're safe. You're mine. They stepped back into the corridor, and that's when Rosa saw it. Not on a person, not in a conversation. In the trash. A clear bag sat inside a bin near the door, filled with disposable items from the unit. Wrappers, gauze, a folded cloth. The kind of leftovers no one thinks about when they're busy saving face. But Rosa's eyes weren't the eyes of someone who didn't understand systems. Rosa's eyes were trained to notice what didn't belong. There was a small adhesive label stuck to one of the wrappers. A bland hospital sticker, the kind people slap on and forget. Rosa didn't dig. She didn't reach in like a thief. She simply leaned in enough to read it. A time, a medication name, a line indicating it had been administered. Rosa's pulse jumped because she had been in that corridor. She had heard the frantic voices. She had seen the chaos. She had felt the heat on that baby's forehead with her own fingers, and she knew what she had not seen. She had not seen anyone act with urgency until a child's instinct forced a room to react. The paper said one thing, the moment said another. Rosa stared at the label until it felt like the letters were burning into her memory. Then, with a motion so subtle it could have been nothing, Rosa pulled the label free and folded it into her palm. Small, silent, but now impossible to unsee. She slid it into the pocket of her uniform, the same pocket that held the kind of quiet knowledge she'd been carrying for years. When the paper says one thing and the body says another, someone is lying. Across the corridor, Derek watched Caleb speak with the board doctor again. Not money, not a handshake. Something worse, familiarity, a touch on the shoulder, a nod like an agreement already made. Derek felt his stomach turn. He turned sharply to Caleb. I want an outside specialist, Derek said. Right now. Caleb's face softened, as if Derek were a child in shock. You're emotional, Caleb said. That's normal. But this isn't the time to distrust everyone. Derek's eyes narrowed. It's exactly the time, Derek replied. Caleb held his gaze a fraction too long. Then he smiled again, like a man confident he could still steer the story back to where he wanted it. Rosa walked back toward the small room with Sophia, her hand firm around her daughter's fingers. The administrative woman waited with the form again. Caleb stood beside her, patient as a judge. Rosa sat, Sophia on her lap. The form was pushed toward her one more time. Rosa's voice stayed steady. I'll sign after it's corrected, she said, and after I see the cameras. Caleb's smile returned, polite and sharp. Then you've chosen the difficult path, he said. He turned slightly toward the security guard at the door. Escort them out, Caleb said, for precaution. Sophia clung to Rosa's neck, fear flashing in her eyes again. Rosa rose slowly, holding her daughter close, her face composed even as her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The guard stepped forward, and as he did, Caleb's gaze dropped just for a heartbeat to the pocket of Rosa's uniform. Rosa felt it like a cold touch, like he knew, like he'd seen the smallest shift in fabric, like the first proof she'd found had just put a target on her back. The guard motioned toward the hallway. Rosa took a step, Sophia trembling against her. And Derek, across the corridor, watched them being moved like a problem to be removed. Something in his face hardened. Because a hospital doesn't throw out a mother holding a child unless there's something it's trying to protect. And in that moment, the truth didn't feel far away. It felt close enough to touch. In that hospital, the truth had just been born, and someone was already trying to suffocate it. The hospital didn't want to just throw her out anymore. It wanted to make her an example. If you love stories that squeeze your chest tight and still deliver justice at the end, hit like and subscribe now. Because the next decision this billionaire makes changes everything. Rosa and Sophia were moved into a side corridor where the lights felt harsher and the air felt colder, like the building saved its least mercy for the people with the least power. A metal door with restricted access stamped on it sat a few steps away, and two security guards stood nearby as if a mother and a child were something that needed to be contained. Rosa kept Sophia close, not with panic, with purpose. The way a mother holds a child when the world starts sounding like it wants to claim her. Then Caleb arrived, not alone. He brought backup the way polished men always do, not muscle, not shouting, but people with clipboards and quiet confidence, a woman from administration, a man from legal. Both of them dressed like neutrality, the kind of neutrality that always seems to lean toward whoever has the money. Caleb spoke first, voice calm, expression almost apologetic. I tried to handle this discreetly, he said, but you're refusing to cooperate. Cooperate. Rosa felt the word land like a blade hidden inside velvet. The legal representative opened a folder and began reading, tone flat and official. Incident report. Unauthorized access to intensive care. Risk to patient integrity. Potential negligence by the employee responsible for common areas. Security breach, liability exposure. Every phrase was designed to do one thing, turn a human moment into a criminal one. Sophia pressed behind her mother, fingers curled into Rosa's uniform like it was a blanket. Rosa didn't scream. She didn't beg. She stood there and listened because she understood something most people didn't. If you react the way they expect, they get to label you. Caleb's eyes flicked down to Sophia, and his voice went softer, sweeter, more poisonous. You do understand, he said gently. that if this becomes a formal case, child services could get involved. Rosa's throat tightened so fast it scared her. The thought hit her like a sudden drop in an elevator. Sophia's little body stiffened as if she understood the danger even without knowing the words. Rosa breathed through it. One inhale. One exhale. She refused to let fear be her confession. "My daughter is not a threat," she said, voice steady but low. She was a terrified child who saw a baby burning with fever. Caleb's smile didn't move. "Exactly," he said, as if she'd just signed something. "So you admit she had contact with the patient?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He had just tried to turn compassion into a crime. A shadow fell across the corridor. A presence. The air changed before Rosa even turned her head. Derek arrived without warning. No entourage, no assistants, just him. Eyes hollowed out by grief and lit by something harder now, something sharper than helplessness. He'd heard the last part. He'd heard child services, and it hit him the way it hit Rosa, as a line crossed. He looked straight at Caleb. "Are you threatening a mother?" Derek asked. Caleb didn't flinch. He put on that same protective tone, the one he'd used for months, the one Derek used to mistake for loyalty. "I'm protecting you," Caleb said. Derek took a step closer. His voice dropped. Dangerous not because it was loud, but because it was controlled. "No," he said, "you're protecting you." Caleb's smile stalled for half a second, just half, but that was enough. Derek turned to the legal rep. "Who's responsible for my son's chart, medication logs, and access records?" Derek asked. "I want everything! Now!" The corridor went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when money speaks with anger behind it. Caleb tried to slide between Derek and the question like he always did. "You don't need to exhaust yourself with this," he said softly. "Let's keep you focused." Derek cut him off without even looking at him. "I didn't ask for your opinion." It wasn't a shout. It was a door closing. And for the first time, Caleb wasn't the one holding the handle. The legal rep cleared his throat, eyes darting between Derek and Caleb as if trying to decide which power mattered more. "That information is governed by hospital policy," he began. Derek stared him down. "Then policy is going to bend," Derek said, "because my son is dying." Caleb's jaw tightened, just slightly. He didn't like the rhythm changing. Rosa watched this with a strange, quiet clarity. She didn't know Derek's world, but she recognized something. A man had finally stopped being managed. The administration woman slid the form toward Rosa again, like if she pushed paper hard enough, it would become truth. Rosa didn't touch it. "I want a copy of the full report," she said. "And the medication record you're claiming lowered his fever." The legal rep's voice turned colder. "That is not within your purview." Rosa lifted her chin. "Truth doesn't belong to a job title," she said. Caleb stepped closer, invading her space with politeness, smiling the way men smile when they want you to surrender without realizing you did. "I'm going to make this easy for you," he said. "You sign, you apologize, and I make sure you keep your job." Rosa felt the trap perfectly. If she signed, she became the official culprit. If she refused, she became the official threat. Either way, the system would label her, and labels were how people got erased. Rosa looked down at Sophia's face, pale and trembling. She knelt, held Sophia's cheeks in her hands, and spoke to her like a promise spoken into the bones. "Look at me," she whispered. "Nobody is taking you from me." Sophia's eyes clung to her mother's the way drowning people cling to air. Rosa rose again, steady. And that's when someone passed by, someone no one important ever watched. An older nurse, shoulders heavy with years, pushing a cart of supplies down the corridor. Her face wasn't soft. It was tired. It was the face of someone who'd seen too much wrong and learned the cost of speaking. As she passed Rosa, her eyes met hers, not with pity, but with recognition. Like she saw what Caleb couldn't. A woman who understood patterns. The nurse slowed just slightly. Something small fluttered from her hand and landed near Rosa's shoe like an accident. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She just kept walking as if nothing had happened. Rosa waited until the eyes around her shifted away. Then she bent, picked up the scrap, and unfolded it in her palm. A name, a place, a warning. I saw it. Don't sign anything. Meet me at the chapel on corridor B. Marta, nursing. Rosa's heart hit her ribs once hard, not relief, not safety, something more fragile and more powerful, an opening. Tell me honestly, would you have the courage to refuse to sign anything, even with the fear of losing your child hanging over you? Rosa didn't change her expression. She folded the note and slid it into her pocket as if it was nothing more than lint. Then she looked up at the administration woman. "I'm not signing," she said calmly. The woman exhaled in frustration. Caleb's smile sharpened. Security shifted their stance. And Rosa knew she had to move without looking like she was moving. She turned toward the nearest guard and said the most ordinary thing in the world. "My daughter needs the restroom." The guard nodded, suspicious but bound by routine. He escorted them, staying close enough to remind Rosa who held the power in the hallway. Rosa walked with measured steps, no rushing, no panic, no sudden turns that would make her look guilty. Halfway down, she glanced at the corridor signs, then guided Sophia left just slightly toward corridor B. The chapel was small and dim, tucked into the hospital like an afterthought. A few wooden benches, a candle-shaped light, a quiet that felt different from the hospital's cold silence. This quiet held grief instead of rules. Marta was already there, sitting with her hands clasped, as if she'd been praying for courage and wasn't sure if she had enough. When Rosa and Sophia entered, Marta stood quickly, then forced herself to settle. She didn't waste words. "They're trying to erase you," Marta whispered, "because you saw what they didn't want seen." Rosa held Sophia closer. Sophia's eyes flicked around the chapel, confused, scared, but trusting her mother enough to stay quiet. Rosa looked at Marta. "What did you see?" she asked. Marta swallowed. Her fear was old, worn in, the kind of fear that lives in your joints. "I saw the board doctor log medication at a time he wasn't even on the unit," Marta said, voice barely above a breath. Rosa didn't interrupt. Marta continued, words breaking into pieces like she couldn't afford a full sentence. "I saw a medication cart go in and come out with a seal swapped." Rosa's stomach tightened. "And the cameras," Marta added, eyes darting to the chapel door as if it might have ears. "I saw them go down exactly when they should have been watching." Rosa closed her eyes for a brief second, not as prayer, more like a woman trying to keep her mind from exploding into anger. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded label she'd taken earlier. She opened it between them like it was something holy and dangerous at the same time. Marta's face drained. Not because it was a final answer, because it was the first physical thing that refused to fit the official story. Marta's lips parted, and when she spoke, it came out like confession. "I knew," she whispered. Rosa stared at her. Why didn't you say anything? Rosa asked. Marta's eyes filled, not with tears, but with shame. Because they bury people, Marta said. Not with dirt, with paperwork, with reports, with silence. If you fight them alone, you disappear. Rosa felt the weight of that. She'd been disappearing for years without even realizing it. Marta looked down at Sophia, then back at Rosa. But you're not alone now, Marta said. Not if we're careful. Across the hospital, Derek was done waiting. He stepped into a private office and made calls from his own phone. Not through hospital channels, not through Caleb, not through anyone who could filter what he asked. He called his attorney. His real attorney, the one who didn't owe the hospital favors. He called for an outside specialist, independent and immediate. He demanded IT retrieve the camera history and access control logs. Caleb tried to intercept him like he always had. This is going to cause noise, Caleb warned. Press, speculation. Derek turned, eyes cold. Noise is better than a funeral, he said. Caleb's smile faltered again, just a fraction. Then he recovered it. Because men like Caleb always recover. But he was watching now, watching Derek, watching Rosa, watching anything that threatened the story he'd built. Caleb saw Rosa and Sophia emerge from the chapel corridor. He saw the tiny shift in Rosa's posture, the kind of shift that happens when someone finds a reason to stand up straighter. He didn't accuse her in the hallway. He did something more dangerous. He planted a narrative. He leaned toward security and spoke quietly. Keep a close eye on her, Caleb said. She could be trying to steal information, manipulate Mr. Hale. This could get ugly. Manipulate. That word was a toxin, perfect for turning a poor woman into a suspect. Then Caleb drifted toward one of the board doctors, voice calm. Be prepared for an emergency transfer, he said, as if it was a simple precaution. The family needs security. Transfer. Rosa didn't hear it yet, but Marta did, and Marta's eyes widened. They're going to move the baby, Marta whispered. They'll move him away from records, away from people who remember. Rosa's heart jumped. Marta leaned in. I can try to pull the internal medication log, Marta said. I can get the name of whoever entered that timestamp. Rosa nodded once, firm. I'm not signing anything, Rosa said, and I'm not leaving my daughter alone. Marta squeezed Rosa's hand quickly, then let go like even touch could be dangerous. On the other side of the building, Derek's phone buzzed with a message from his IT team. His eyes scanned it once, then again. His face tightened, because the words were simple, and that's what made them terrifying. There was a 10-minute blackout in the hallway camera system, only during that time window. 10 minutes. Long enough for doors to open. Long enough for records to be altered. Long enough for truth to be born and smothered. Derek lifted his gaze and saw Caleb approaching, calm as ever, smile ready. Caleb's expression said, everything is under control. Derek's eyes said, you don't get to say that anymore. And somewhere in the building, a nurse and a janitor had just become a threat. Not because they had power, but because they had memory. In that hospital, someone had turned off the building's eyes. Exactly when the truth tried to take its first breath. Derek used to believe the worst pain a man could carry was the kind you bury. He used to think it ended at the cemetery, in the wet hush of soil, in the way people kept saying her name like it might soften the truth. But tonight, standing in a hospital corridor that smelled like bleach and cold metal, he watched someone try to transfer the last piece of his family like it was a package with a tracking number. And something in him snapped awake. If stories that tighten your chest and still deliver justice are your thing, stay close. leave a like and subscribe now, because what Rosa is about to place in his hands inside this hospital is going to change everything. Derek moved down the hallway fast, controlled, dangerous in the quiet way grief becomes when it's tired of begging. Behind him, Caleb kept pace like a shadow that believed it owned the man it followed. "I already called the best specialists," Caleb said, voice smooth as polished glass. "You don't need to get involved with staff. Let them work." Derek didn't answer. He didn't even glance at him. Because he saw Rosa first. She was pressed against a wall near a restricted access door, one arm wrapped around Sophia, the other hand gripping a crumpled form they'd tried to force her to sign. Rosa's posture was upright like she was refusing to fold, but her breathing was clipped. Not hysteria, not drama. The kind of shallow breath a person takes when one wrong sentence could cost her everything. Sophia's face was blotched from crying. Her fingers were tangled in her mother's uniform as if cloth could be a shield. Derek stopped in front of them. For the first time, he looked at Rosa as a person and not a role. "You're not signing anything," he said. Rosa lifted her eyes, startled by the certainty in his voice. She wasn't used to certainty being offered to her. Not from men in suits. Not in places that smelled like power. "They said if I don't sign," her voice cracked on the edge of the sentence. Derek's tone stayed low. "They said that to scare you." Sophia looked up at Derek with the natural suspicion of a child who learned early that powerful people often pretend not to see small people. Derek didn't reach for her. He didn't crowd her. He simply lowered himself a little, enough that he wasn't towering over her like a wall. "You're her daughter?" he asked. Sophia nodded once, barely. Derek studied her face like it mattered, like it counted. "You did something for a baby today, didn't you?" Sophia hesitated, shame and fear fighting inside her. Then she gave the smallest nod, almost invisible. Rosa's throat tightened. She didn't want to need him. She didn't want to owe him. But the building had already decided she was guilty and she was running out of places to stand. Caleb stepped into the space between them, as if he could reorganize the moment. "She's emotionally overwhelmed," Caleb said gently. "This kind of situation can create confusion." Confusion. The word people used when they wanted truth to sound like hysteria. Derek turned his head toward Caleb, slow. The look wasn't rage yet. It was something colder. "You don't speak for me," Derek said. Caleb's smile held, practiced. "I'm just trying to help." Derek faced Rosa again. "You have something," he said. "Something you saw. Something they don't want seen." Rosa swallowed hard. Marta's warning flashed through her head. Don't talk in the corridor. Don't hand them a reason. But the clock was crushing the air out of the building. Somewhere behind those doors, her child's heartbeat and Derek's child's life were both being measured in seconds. Rosa reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded label she'd taken earlier. She didn't hand it over yet. She just opened it enough for Derek to see the timestamp and the note about medication being administered. It was a glimpse. A blade shone quickly. Caleb's eyes flicked down to it. For a fraction of a second, his smile failed. It didn't fall. It didn't collapse. It simply missed a beat. That tiny mistake was louder than a confession. Derek saw it. Rosa saw it too. The air sharpened. Derek's attorney arrived without fanfare. A man who looked like he'd been built out of restraint and paperwork. He didn't greet anyone with warmth. He didn't waste time. Derek motioned him closer. "Formalize this," Derek said. "Right now." Caleb made a soft sound of irritation disguised as concern. "You're creating a legal conflict inside a hospital." Derek's voice turned razor thin. "No, he said. "I'm preventing a funeral." The attorney began asking for records the way a surgeon asks for instruments, access logs, staff roster by hour, clinical justification for every decision made in the last stretch of time. Explanation for the camera outage, a copy of any transfer request currently in motion. The hospital's administrative staff stiffened, their eyes skittered toward Caleb as if he were the real authority. Rosa leaned in toward Derek and spoke without looking at Caleb, like she was trying to keep her words from being stolen. "There's a nurse," she said. "Marta. She saw things. She said the times don't match." Derek didn't look surprised. He looked like a man finally watching his own memories line up. He stared at Rosa, and his voice softened for the first time. "You know medicine." Rosa's jaw tightened. "I finished school," she said. Then she stopped, like the next part was a wound she didn't usually show strangers. "I couldn't afford the last exam to practice." Derek's eyes held on her face. There was a flicker of something that wasn't pity, something closer to anger at the world. But the building didn't allow pauses. The beeping from behind the door kept dragging everything forward. A door opened down the hall, and a bored doctor stepped out with organized urgency, the kind that looked rehearsed. "We need to transfer the baby," he announced. "A unit with higher resources. Ambulance is on the way." Caleb stepped forward immediately, warm, helpful. "It's the best option," he said. "You don't want to risk waiting." Derek's spine went rigid. He heard what Rosa heard. He heard what Marta had warned. Transfer meant distance. Distance meant records become harder to reach. Distance meant witnesses get left behind. If something happened on the way, it would become a tragedy with no fingerprints. Derek took a step closer to the doctor. "Who authorized that?" he asked. "The board," the doctor said, as if it answered everything. Derek's eyes narrowed. "I'm the father," he said. "I didn't authorize anything." Caleb reached for Derek's arm, the way he'd done 1,000 times since they were young, a gesture disguised as support, but built out of control. "You're shaken," Caleb said softly. "Let's not make this worse." Derek pulled his arm away with a short movement, like shaking off something poisonous. "Don't touch me," he said. The corridor seemed to shrink around that sentence. Caleb's smile stayed, but his eyes hardened. Derek's phone vibrated in his hand. A message from his IT team came through with a file attached, labeled with a timestamp that made Derek's stomach twist. Not the main corridor camera. A secondary angle. A service elevator feed. The footage was grainy, slightly warped, filmed through a metal surface that caught reflections. The kind of camera nobody cared about until the wrong thing happened in front of it. Derek opened it. The video showed a figure entering the service elevator during the exact window the main hallway cameras went dark. The person wore a mask and a lab coat. In their arms was a small thermal cooler. In their other hand, a folder. No face, no name, no audio. But the camera caught something else. A wrist. A watch. Expensive. Unmistakable in its shape and clasp. The kind of piece you don't buy casually. The kind you recognize because you've seen it across conference tables and on private planes. And there was one more detail, as sharp as a knife in a blurry image. A cufflink. A custom design with a tiny, peculiar twist in the metal. Derek didn't breathe for a second. His mind flashed through 100 moments where that watch had been on a wrist near him. Where that cufflink had caught light when Caleb lifted a glass. When Caleb shook hands. When Caleb adjusted his tie like he was settling into ownership. Caleb noticed the stillness in Derek's face and stepped closer. Voice eager. Ready to control. "What is that?" he asked, already sounding like he had the answer he wanted. Derek didn't look up from the screen. Caleb leaned in and saw it. His mouth opened with a prepared laugh. "That could be anyone," Caleb said quickly. Too quickly. Derek lifted his eyes. "No," he said. One syllable. Heavy. Final. Rosa stared at the footage for a heartbeat. She didn't recognize the watch. She didn't know the symbols of Derek's world. But she understood operations. She understood the language of people who move things in the dark: cooler, folder, mask, service elevator, blackout window. That wasn't care. That was a plan. "They were going to take him," Rosa whispered, voice almost gone. "Before you could stop it." Derek's chest rose and fell once. Deep, controlled. Then he moved, and the movement itself was an answer. He turned to his attorney. "Stop the transfer," he said, "immediately." He turned to his security. "Nobody touches my son," he said, "without my direct approval." Then he faced Rosa again. "You and your daughter. Stay with me," he said. "You don't stand alone in this building." Rosa hesitated. Pride wrestled fear. A lifetime of being taught not to trust men like him, not to believe the powerful ever offered protection without a price. Sophia squeezed Rosa's hand, small fingers trembling, like she was saying with her grip what she couldn't say out loud. "Don't leave me." Rosa's shoulders lowered a fraction. Not surrender, a decision. Caleb took 2 steps back, like he was giving space, like he was collecting himself. He pulled out his phone. He didn't whisper like a cartoon villain. He spoke like a man confirming a reservation. "Move it up," Caleb said smoothly. 5 minutes. Derek saw him do it. And Derek understood the truth that hit hardest of all. Caleb wasn't trying to save the baby. Caleb was trying to outrun the proof. The board doctor started insisting again, tightening the language around the situation. "For the patient's safety," Derek's attorney cut in, calm and sharp. "Transfer is suspended pending review," he said. The doctor's eyes flashed with irritation. Then he looked at Caleb, and the flicker of connection between them was too familiar to ignore. Derek felt the last of his doubt disintegrate. He stepped toward the doors of the unit like he was walking into a storm. A staff member tried to block him with a clipboard. "Sir, this is restricted." Derek didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm going in," he said. Something in his tone made the clipboard feel like a toy. Rosa stood behind him with Sophia, watching the wealthiest man in the building move like a father and not a brand. Caleb's face remained calm, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Because Derek wasn't just refusing to sign papers anymore, he was refusing to be guided. And that meant Caleb's cleanest weapon was gone. The corridor filled with motion, security radios, nurses stepping aside, the squeal of a gurney wheel somewhere deeper in the unit. An ambulance crew passing through a side door, moving fast, expecting the transfer to be real. 5 minutes. The number sat in the air like a countdown. Derek's phone buzzed again with a second message from IT, shorter this time, colder. Secondary camera captured movement during the blackout, wrist and cufflink visible, matching previously documented images. Derek's hand tightened around the phone. Rosa watched his face, and she didn't ask him what it meant. She already knew it meant one thing. The lie was no longer a feeling, it was an image. Blurry, incomplete, unfit to convict, but impossible to unsee. Derek turned his head slightly, not looking at Rosa at first, as if he wasn't used to speaking like this to someone in a janitor's uniform. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. Rosa's eyes burned, but she didn't let tears fall. Not here. Not where tears could be used against her. "I just didn't want them to blame my child," she said. Derek's voice turned rough. "They're done blaming innocent people," he said. Caleb took another slow step forward, the elegant villain trying one last time to soften the moment with reason. "Derek," he said, "you're spiraling. You're going to regret the scene you're making." Derek looked at him fully now, not as a friend, not as a brother, as a question that finally had an answer. "You're the one who should be regretting something," Derek said. Caleb's smile held, but it trembled at the edges the way a building trembles when the foundation finally shifts. And in that hospital, with 5 minutes collapsing into 4, the truth had finally found its shape. It didn't have a name yet, but it had a wrist, it had a cufflink, and it had 2 witnesses standing side by side, staring at a monster that suddenly realized it had been seen. At the far end of the corridor, someone called out that the ambulance crew was ready. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the doors, calculating. Derek's hand tightened around the phone again. Rosa pulled Sophia closer, and the narrator's voice drops low enough to feel like a warning breathed into your ear. In 5 minutes, they were going to try to erase the baby from this building. And in 5 minutes, they were going to try to erase the mother who dared to notice. So tell me, would you confront the best friend right now in front of everyone? Or would you pretend you don't know, just long enough to catch every single person who helped him? The sound of wheels in that hallway didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like escape. And when Rosa heard the word transfer again, it wasn't the word that scared her. It was the way it was said, quiet, settled, already decided by someone who wasn't the baby's father. If your heart's already racing right now, stay with us. Tap like and subscribe, because what they try to do in the next few minutes isn't just unfair. It's calculated. Down the corridor, Caleb stood beside the hospital's clinical director like they were co-hosting a press conference nobody asked for. His suit was still perfect. His voice was still warm. His eyes were still doing math. "For the good of the patient and the institution," Caleb said, just loud enough for the right ears to catch it, "the transfer will be immediate. The father is emotionally unstable. We need to follow protocol." Emotionally unstable. Rosa watched the label land on Derek like a stamp. 2 security guards shifted into position, not aggressive, not dramatic, just enough to change the corridor into a border you needed permission to cross. The whole building seemed to understand the choreography. Nurses didn't look up. Administrators pretended they were busy. Everyone moved like they'd been trained to become furniture. Derek tried to step forward anyway. Not with anger, with gravity, with the pure, quiet force of a man who had already lost too much and refused to lose more. "Move," he said. A guard held up an open palm, polite, firm, cold. "Sir, we're following hospital protocol." Rosa felt her stomach drop. In places like this, protocol didn't mean safety. It meant control. The ambulance hadn't even arrived yet, but the baby was already being moved, shifted deeper through a side corridor toward a service elevator, toward a cleaner exit with fewer eyes. Rosa caught glimpses through glass and gaps in bodies, a tiny bundled shape, a thin blanket, a nurse walking fast with her shoulders up like she could physically block the world from seeing what she carried. Everything was too neat, too fast, too cooperative. And then Caleb turned his attention where it mattered most. He didn't go after Derek first. He went after Rosa. He angled his body toward an administrative coordinator with a clipboard and a blazer, and suddenly Rosa felt the room's gaze drift toward her like a tide turning. "We need to document what happened," Caleb said, calm as a bedtime story. A cleaning staff member entered a restricted area. Her child manipulated the patient with water. There's a contamination risk. There's institutional liability. Water. He said it like it was poison. He said her daughter like she was an accomplice. Rosa's face went cold. Sophia's fingers tightened in her uniform so hard it hurt. A guard took one step toward the child, and something primal in Rosa roared up her spine. "Sweetheart," the guard said, not unkindly, "you need to come with us." Sophia didn't move. She just pressed closer into her mother's side, eyes wide, breathing shallow like the whole building had become a mouth. Rosa stepped forward once. "She doesn't go anywhere without me." The coordinator lifted her voice in that practiced tone that pretends it's about order when it's really about obedience. "Ma'am, please cooperate. This is a hospital." Rosa heard the sentence the way a mother hears a threat disguised as manners. "This is a hospital." Meaning, you will do what we say. Meaning, we can make you disappear. Rosa opened her mouth to speak, but the system did what it always did to people like her. It tried to steal her voice by surrounding it with authority. The coordinator began talking over her. A nurse looked away. Someone wrote something down without asking her name. And Caleb watched it all like a man watching a door quietly lock. Then from the edge of the corridor, Marta appeared. She didn't rush in like a hero. She didn't make a speech. She moved like a worker who knew which cameras were real and which ones were theater. Her eyes found Rosa's, and her mouth barely moved when she spoke. "They're going to ruin you right now," Marta murmured. "That's what they do when someone gets too close." Rosa swallowed. Her throat hurt from holding back panic. Sophia's hand trembled inside hers. Marta's gaze flicked toward the service corridor, toward the direction they were taking the baby. "I know where the audit trail is," Marta said. "Real system records, not opinions, not stories. But if we don't pull it now, they'll wipe it." Rosa looked at Derek being fenced off by polite hands and cold language. She looked at her daughter being treated like a biohazard. She looked at the baby being moved toward a corridor that felt like a tunnel with no return. And in that moment, she understood something brutal. If she stayed and argued, they would crush her. If she left to grab proof, they might still crush her. But at least she'd be holding something that could cut through the line. Rosa turned toward Sophia and lowered herself until their eyes met. "Stay right behind me," she whispered. "Don't talk to anyone. Just look at me." Sophia nodded fast. Tears gathered but not falling, like even crying felt dangerous. Marta led them down a side hallway that smelled stronger of alcohol and colder air. The lights buzzed overhead. The distant beeping of monitors sounded like a heartbeat trapped inside the walls. They passed doors with badge readers, doors that didn't open unless the building recognized you as someone who mattered. Rosa had cleaned those doors. Tonight, she was trying to get through them. At the first badge-locked door, Marta pulled out an old visitor badge from a lanyard hidden beneath her scrub top. It looked worn, forgotten. The kind of human mistake systems pretend they don't have. She tapped it. A green light blinked. The door clicked open. Rosa's breath hitched. Sophia's small shoes squeaked on the polished floor, too loud in the quiet. Inside was a cramped office that felt like the nervous system of the hospital. Terminals, printers, a wall-mounted monitor with security feeds, shelves of binders no one touched unless they had to. A faint hum of machines like the place never slept. Marta moved with purpose. No wasted gestures, no drama. She logged into a terminal, fingers flying with the speed of someone who'd watched too many people get hurt because the truth arrived too late. "Okay," Marta breathed, eyes scanning. "Medication, dispensing, log, audit trail, override history." Rosa stood over her shoulder without touching anything. She didn't need to. Her mind was already catching the shape of it. A list of entries appeared, timestamps, user IDs, terminal locations, actions taken. And there it was. a medication entry marked as administered during the exact window when the baby's fever had been raging, and when Rosa had watched the room scramble like no one had done anything yet. But the entry had another detail: terminal location, not the baby's unit, not even close. It had been entered from a different wing, from a station that made no clinical sense, and made perfect strategic sense. Someone had logged it from a place where they could write the story without being in the room. Rosa felt her skin prickle. Marta clicked deeper. A user ID popped up, linked to a board physician, and beneath it, an internal signature stamp that showed the entry had been authenticated, not handwritten, not alleged, system stamped. Rosa didn't need doses or drug names to understand the crime of it. The paper was trying to outrun the body. The record was trying to create a reality that hadn't happened. Sophia leaned into Rosa's hip, eyes locked on the screen like she could feel the weight of the moment even without understanding the words. Rosa laid a palm on the top of her daughter's head, grounding herself in something real. Marta swallowed hard. "I thought I was being paranoid," she whispered. "I thought maybe I was just tired." Rosa's voice was barely there. "You weren't." Marta opened another window, camera backups, secondary feeds, service systems. The main corridor footage had a clean black gap, still pretending to be a glitch. But a service elevator camera had caught something in the reflection of a metal door, grainy, warped, but present. Marta pulled a single frame and froze it. A masked figure, a thermal cooler, a folder. And then the detail that made Rosa's stomach turn the moment she saw Derek's reaction in her mind like a prophecy. A wrist, a watch clasp that looked too specific to be coincidence. Marta stared at it for a long second. That's not staff," she murmured. Rosa's heart hammered. She didn't even know the name of what she was looking at, but she knew what it meant. Somebody had moved something they didn't want traced. Somebody had done it during the blackout. Somebody had planned it. Marta's thumb hovered over the screen. Then she moved. She didn't just show it. She copied it. She exported it. She pulled the audit entry with its system stamp and printed it, the machine spitting paper like it was finally doing something honest. She took photos of the screen with her own phone, not for drama, because evidence had to survive even if the terminal got wiped. Then, with the kind of calm courage that only shows up after years of swallowing fear, Marta emailed the files to more than one place at once. Derek's attorney, Derek's head of security. A compliance inbox that would auto-stamp the time, a personal backup address that wasn't on any hospital list. Send, send, send. Rosa watched Marta's thumb hit the button and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. This was a trail, a track in fresh snow, and somebody was about to realize they'd left footprints. Marta stood up and looked at Rosa. "They're going to come for me," she said quietly. Rosa nodded, and her voice broke just enough to show she was human. "Then we don't waste what you just did." They stepped back into the hallway. The building sounded different now, louder, sharper, like the lie could sense it had been touched. Up ahead, the chaos had grown teeth. The baby's gurney was moving fast toward the service elevator. Derek was being held back by procedure and bodies. His attorney was talking, firm and legal, but the hospital was doing what institutions do when cornered. It was speeding up. The ambulance crew had arrived. The squeak of the stretcher wheels was a countdown you could hear. Caleb stood near the elevator with the director, still composed, still in control of his tone, like he believed the ending belonged to him. Then Caleb saw Rosa and Marta returning together, and he knew. He didn't ask what they had. He didn't need to. His eyes narrowed for half a second, and then he made his move in public, clean, cruel, elegant. "I need to inform everyone," Caleb said, voice carrying just enough, that the cleaning staff member is having an episode. She's been invading restricted areas and stealing information. "Security, please!" Episode. Rosa felt the word try to paint her into a caricature. Poor woman, unstable, emotional, dangerous. Sophia clutched Rosa again, body trembling. Rosa took one step forward, and this time her voice rose, not screaming, not hysterical, just loud enough to be impossible to ignore. "I'm not having an episode," Rosa said. "I'm telling the truth." The clinical director lifted a hand. "Ma'am, this is an internal matter." And Derek's voice cut through the corridor like steel through cloth. "My son is not an internal matter." Everyone turned. Caleb's smile stayed. It was almost impressive how hard he worked to keep it. Marta moved fast, straight to Derek's attorney, and placed her phone in his hand with the audit trail open. Her voice shook a little, but she didn't step back. "This is system audit," Marta said. "Time-stamped, user-stamped, terminal-stamped. They can't argue its opinion." Caleb tilted his head, graceful, skeptical. "Screens can be faked," he said. Marta didn't flinch. "That's why it's already sent," she replied, and lifted her own phone to show the outgoing messages, the timestamps, the multiple recipients. "It's in more than one place now." For the first time all night, Caleb's eyes lost their warmth. Not his smile, just his eyes. The ambulance crew called out that they needed to move. Derek looked from the evidence to the elevator to the direction his baby was being pushed. The trap was obvious now. If he argued, they would move the baby. If he physically stopped them, they would call him unstable and use police to take control. Caleb's entire plan was built on forcing Derek to react in the only ways that could be framed against him. Rosa stepped closer to Derek, voice low, urgent, mother to father, human to human. "Don't argue with him," she said. "Close the door." Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. He acted. He turned to his security lead. "Lock the service elevator," Derek said. "Now." His security moved immediately, not dramatic, not violent, professional. A key card, a code, a hand on the control panel. The elevator chirped once, denied. A red light blinked. For one stunned second, the corridor froze. The gurney stopped. The ambulance crew stared. The clinical director's face flushed. Caleb's smile thinned. "You're making a mistake," Caleb said softly, like he was offering guidance. Derek stepped closer to him, voice so low only Caleb could hear it. "No," Derek said. "I'm stopping yours." The director turned sharply toward the nurses' station. "Call the police," he announced, loud enough to set the building on fire with words. "The father is interfering with protocol." Rosa felt the true shape of the next move slam into her chest. They weren't just trying to take the baby, they were about to make it legal. They were about to arrest the father and move the baby for safety. Caleb looked almost relieved, like the law had always been his favorite instrument. Sophia buried her face against Rosa's side. Derek didn't step back. He held his ground in front of the elevator like a man who'd finally decided grief would not be the thing that made him obedient. And somewhere beyond the walls, faint but growing, the sound of approaching sirens began to rise. In that moment, the transfer stopped being about medicine. It became about power, and Caleb was about to use the law like a weapon. So tell me, if you were Derek, would you face the police and the hospital head on? Or would you pretend to comply just long enough to follow that ambulance and catch every hand that touched your child? The siren didn't sound like help. It sounded like a sentence being carried down a hallway on cold air. When the patrol car stopped outside and the officer stepped in, the hospital didn't feel like a place of healing anymore. It felt like a courtroom that had decided the verdict before the first question. Two officers rounded the corner with that steady, practiced posture, eyes scanning fast, taking in the locked service elevator, the stalled gurney, the ambulance crew waiting with tight faces, and Derek standing in the middle of it all like a man holding back a flood with his bare hands. The clinical director moved first, because people like him always move first. He rushed to the officers as if he'd been waiting for them to arrive and needed to hand them the story before anyone else could. "The father is blocking a medically necessary transfer," he said. "We have a critical patient. Every second matters." Caleb stood a half step behind him, polished and calm, the kind of calm that doesn't belong in a crisis unless you're the one who planned it. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a concerned friend, like a protector, like the person everyone should listen to. And that was the problem. "We're trying to save the child's life," Caleb added, voice gentle enough to feel like a blanket. Any delay could be fatal. Rosa felt the words hit the corridor like poison dressed as prayer. Save the child's life. No one wanted to be the person who questioned that sentence out loud. That's why it worked. The older officer turned toward Derek, hand hovering near his belt. Not reaching, not threatening, just reminding everyone that the law had arrived and it came with weight. "Sir," he said, firm but not cruel, "you need to allow access. If this is a medical transfer, you can't interfere." Derek's breathing was controlled, but his eyes were raw. He looked like a man who had trained his whole life to command boardrooms, and none of it had prepared him for the helplessness of being a father in a hallway where doors could be closed in his face. He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He spoke like a man choosing every word because he understood that one wrong step could cost him his freedom and his child. "I'm not here to fight," Derek said. "I'm here to protect my son. I will cooperate with a transfer when it's documented properly because someone is lying in this hospital." That last word shifted something. It didn't sound like grief anymore. It sounded like an accusation. His attorney stepped in, holding a phone like it was both a weapon and a shield. "Officer, before any action is taken against the father," the attorney said, "I'm filing a formal complaint. We have evidence of record manipulation and attempted obstruction. This is no longer a simple dispute." Obstruction. That word turned heads. You could feel the corridor change as people realized the air had gotten heavier. Phones appeared the way they always do when human beings sense a moment that might become history. Not openly, never openly, but tucked behind a shoulder, angled from a pocket, held low like shame and curiosity holding hands. The hospital's internal rumor machine didn't wait for truth. It never does. Messages flew through staff group chats, whispered mouth to ear as people walked by, sharpened with every retelling. A cleaning staff member invaded the unit. A child touched the baby. The billionaire lost it. They're calling the police because he's unstable. Rosa felt the rumors rushing past her like a river trying to sweep her away. People looked at her differently now, not like a person, like a headline. Sophia stood pressed into Rosa's side, small body shaking in little tremors that broke Rosa's heart because they were the kind that happen when a child is trying to be brave but doesn't have the muscles for it yet. Sophia's voice was barely above a breath. "Mom, are they gonna take me?" The question landed inside Rosa like a stone. Rosa knelt enough to bring her face close to her daughter's, and she didn't promise the world. She promised something she could actually control. "No," she whispered. "Not while I'm breathing." She kissed Sophia's forehead the way you do when you're trying to seal courage into a child like a prayer. Then Caleb stepped into the center of the moment as if he belonged there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers in rage. He did something much worse. He spoke with the calm of a man who knew words could ruin lives faster than fists ever could. "Officer," Caleb said, "I hate to say this, but there are complicating factors. This woman," he gestured toward Rosa without even saying her name, "has been claiming she understands medicine. She isn't licensed. She was a student. Years ago, she's emotionally invested and confused." Confused. Rosa felt the trap being built around her with polite language and clean edges. Caleb kept going, careful and surgical. And her child entered a sterile area and made contact with the patient. Whatever her intention was, it created risk. We can't ignore that. Rosa's throat tightened, not from guilt, because she knew what her daughter had done came from fear and instinct, but from the cruelty of watching someone turn compassion into a crime. Rosa stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't collapse. "My daughter didn't go in there to hurt anyone," Rosa said. "She was terrified. She saw a baby burning with fever and nobody was doing anything that looked like help." The clinical director started to cut in, irritated. "Ma'am, you are not qualified to—" Rosa didn't argue with him. She didn't try to dominate the room. She did something smarter. She chose honesty like armor. "I studied medicine," Rosa said, steady now. "I finished school. I couldn't afford the final exam to practice. I cleaned floors to keep my daughter fed. That doesn't make me blind. That doesn't make me stupid." Somewhere behind a shoulder, someone's phone camera tilted slightly higher. Rosa continued, not begging for pity, standing her ground. "And because I've spent years cleaning, I learned to notice what people leave behind. I learned to see what doesn't fit. And tonight, things don't fit." The older officer watched her, eyes narrowed. Not in suspicion, but in focus. He'd seen liars. He'd seen panicked people. Rosa wasn't performing. She was holding herself together with her fingernails, and that kind of truth carries a certain weight. Marta moved to Rosa's side then, close enough to say, without saying, "I'm here." Marta's voice was quiet, but clear, aimed at the officer like a confession and a warning at the same time. "I've worked here a long time," Marta said. "This isn't normal. I saw entries in the records that didn't match what was happening, and I saw the cameras go out at exactly the time they shouldn't have." The attorney lifted his phone, turning the screen toward the officer. "System audit logs," he said. "Time-stamped, user-linked, terminal-linked." The officer frowned, leaning in slightly. "This came from the hospital system?" "Yes," Marta said. "And while we were pulling it, someone tried to wipe it." Caleb let out a soft, almost amused breath, like the whole thing was a misunderstanding that competent people would clear up. "With respect," he said, "screens can be faked. People misread technical things all the time." Derek's head turned slowly toward him. There was something in Derek's expression that hadn't been there earlier. Not just fear, recognition. Like he'd finally seen the shape of Caleb's control and realized it had been wrapped around his life for a long time. "My friend," Derek said, voice low and sharp, "you keep talking about what people misread, but you never talk about my son." Caleb's smile stayed in place, but his eyes tightened for a fraction of a second. That fraction was loud. The clinical director reached for Marta's phone like it belonged to the institution. "This device contains hospital property and internal information. Hand it over." Rosa stepped instinctively between Marta and the director, not to fight, just to block. A mother's body becomes a wall without thinking. Sophia clung to Rosa's back, fingers twisted in fabric like rope. The officer raised a hand. "Stop," he said. "Nobody takes anything. If that device contains evidence, it stays preserved. Do you understand me?" For the first time, the hospital hierarchy had been interrupted by someone who didn't care about titles. A beep sounded from a nearby workstation at the nurse's station. Sharp, wrong, urgent. Heads turned toward it the way people turn toward smoke. A young supervisor, eyes wide, stared at the screen like it had just spoken. She murmured, then louder, unable to stop herself. "It's flagging an access attempt. Someone's trying to delete logs." The corridor went still. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that happens when a room realizes a lie just stumbled. The supervisor swallowed, staring at the monitor. It says, "Unauthorized deletion attempt. Audit trail. Patient record logs." She glanced at the timestamp. Right now. Caleb's face didn't change much. He was good at not changing, but Derek saw it. Rosa saw it. Marta saw it. That moment when a person is calculating what to do next because the plan just hit a wall. The officer stepped closer to the station, eyes hard. "Who has access to delete audit logs?" he asked. The supervisor hesitated, then spoke like someone choosing the truth even though it could cost her. "Not regular staff," she said. "That's executive-level access, administration, high clearance." Caleb's voice came too quickly, too smooth. "This is turning into a circus." That word, circus, was meant to shrink everything back into chaos, to make everyone think, see? This is messy. This is nonsense. But the officer didn't care about Caleb's tone. He cared about the facts. "Where is the deletion request coming from?" the officer asked. The supervisor's hand shook as she clicked through screens. It's a remote session," she said, eyes darting. "Credentials are being used like a physician login, but it's not from the unit. It's from an administrative terminal." She looked up, face pale. "From the executive wing." A hush ran down the corridor like a cold wind. Derek's attorney lifted his phone again, already recording time and screens, already making sure the evidence had somewhere to live beyond this building. "Officer," he said, "that is attempted obstruction. We need preservation orders. We need the hospital to freeze access immediately." The clinical director's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not necessary," he began. Derek cut him off with a voice that didn't ask permission. "It's necessary," Derek said. "Freeze it. Now." The officer turned toward the clinical director. "You," he said, "lock down the system access. Nobody leaves. Nobody touches servers. And you're going to provide me with a chain of custody protocol right now." The director sputtered. "This will cause panic." Derek's response was so quiet, it forced everyone to lean in. "The panic was already here," he said. "It just wasn't happening to you." Sophia's small voice slipped through the tension like a crack in glass. "Mom," she whispered, "are we in trouble?" Rosa's answer came from someplace deep, a place that had been quiet most of her life because she hadn't been allowed to feel powerful. "Not anymore," Rosa said. "Now they are." Caleb stepped toward Derek, lowering his voice the way he always had, as if intimacy could still control him. "You're vulnerable," Caleb said. "You're grieving. You're letting strangers fill your head with stories." Derek stared at him like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. "I've been vulnerable for a year," Derek said. "Ever since I buried my wife. And you've been standing beside me the whole time, telling me what to sign, what to trust, what not to question. Caleb's smile thinned. Derek's voice dropped further, dangerous in its calm. And tonight, you tried to turn my pain into your shield. The officer stepped between them slightly, not out of protection, but out of procedure. Sir, he said to Derek, I need you to cooperate. We're going to sort this out. Derek nodded once. I am cooperating, he said, but my son stays here, under my oversight, under independent review. The ambulance crew waited, restless. The baby's gurney sat half-turned toward the elevator like a decision paused mid-sentence. Caleb looked around at the phones, the whispers, the police, the monitor, with its ugly, undeniable alert. Then he leaned closer to Derek, just enough that his voice wouldn't carry. You think you won? Caleb murmured, the softness of his tone almost insulting. Because you locked an elevator. Derek didn't blink. I think you're scared, Derek said. Caleb's eyes flicked once, fast. And that was the real unmasking. Not a scream, not a confession. A tiny crack of fear on the face of a man who had always believed he could manage any room. The officer turned toward the hospital staff. Everyone involved in this patient's care stays available, he said. No one deletes anything. No one edits anything. If I find out someone touched these records, it gets worse. The corridor held its breath, and somewhere in the middle of it, Rosa realized something that made her knees want to give out. They weren't just fighting for a baby anymore. They were fighting against a machine that had been trained to swallow truth and spit out blame. She tightened her grip on Sophia, not because she wanted to hide her, because she wanted her daughter to feel one thing clearly in the middle of all that noise. You are not alone. As the officers began coordinating with hospital administration, as the attorney started demanding names and access lists, as Marta stood like a witness who had finally decided she didn't care what silence cost anymore, Derek took one step toward the unit. He didn't look back at Caleb. He didn't need to. He had already seen him. And that was the beginning of the end. Because in that corridor, under fluorescent light and quiet panic, the truth finally showed its face. But the war wasn't over yet. Not when a man like Caleb still had people hiding in the system. Not when the baby's life was still hanging on minutes. Not when the final move always comes from the person who's about to lose everything. Comenta aqui. Você acha que Caleb vai tentar fugir? Ou vai tentar derrubar mais alguém antes de cair de vez? The hallway was too full. Too many bodies. Too many badges. Too many people holding their breath like the entire hospital had become one huge chest about to fail. Police stood near the service elevator like they were guarding a crime scene instead of a doorway. The clinical director hovered just behind them, speaking in that careful tone administrators use when they're trying to control the story before the truth gets its turn. Nurses moved in tight lines, eyes darting, afraid to look directly at the wrong person. Phones were out, some hidden, some shamelessly raised, because nothing spreads faster than a scandal when people are scared. Rosa kept Sophia close. One arm wrapped around her daughter like a seatbelt. The other hand held on to her own steadiness, even though she could feel it slipping at the edges. And Caleb didn't run. He never ran. He didn't raise his voice the way desperate people do. He didn't shout the way guilty people sometimes do when they think volume can become innocence. He did what he always did best. He tried to win through procedure. He leaned toward one of the doctors who'd been hovering like a loyal shadow and spoke softly, like he was giving a routine instruction during a normal shift. His voice was calm enough to sound harmless, like a nurse reminding someone to sign a form. "Trigger the transfer protocol," Caleb said. Right now. Make it look clinical. If the baby leaves this floor, none of this will matter." The sentence was short, almost neat, but it carried the weight of something ugly, the kind of plan that doesn't look like a plan because it hides inside paperwork, and paperwork, when it serves the wrong hands, kills truth long before truth can reach a courtroom. The doctor nodded automatically and tried. He swiped his badge, denied. He entered credentials on the terminal, locked out. He moved toward the elevator panel like muscle memory could force it open. It stayed dead. It stayed sealed. It stayed protected. There was an official hold in motion now, and Caleb realized it the same way predators realize they're being watched. By the change in everyone else's eyes. People weren't asking him for permission anymore. They weren't waiting for his approval. They were waiting for someone else's instruction. So Caleb switched weapons. If he couldn't control the system from the inside, he would control the crowd. He turned toward the hallway and lifted his voice just enough to be heard by the right ears. Security, nurses, administrators, and every phone camera hungry for a clean villain. "Look at what she's done," he said, pointing at Rosa like she was a hazard label. "She broke into a restricted area. That child touched the patient. If he dies, it's on her." He said the word "dies" like a verdict, not panic, a sentence. Rosa felt the cold wave climb her spine, not for herself, for the baby, for her daughter, for the way a rumor could ruin a life faster than any truth could save it. Sophia squeezed her hand, small fingers, iron grip. The kind of grip kids only have when they're trying not to cry in front of strangers. "I didn't do anything wrong, Mom," Sophia whispered, eyes shining with fear and shame. Rosa lowered her forehead to her daughter's for a second, breathing her in, anchoring them both. "I know," she said quietly, "and truth doesn't get scared just because someone's yelling." Derek heard Caleb's words, and something in him hardened. Not the theatrical kind of anger, the kind that becomes decision. "Enough," Derek said, low, controlled, and the hallway felt it anyway. One of the officers lifted a hand toward Caleb. "Step back, sir. This is being treated as an active investigation." Caleb offered that polished smile, the one he used on donors, on boards, on families who didn't know they were being managed. "Of course, officer," he said, smooth as glass. "I'm only concerned about the patient." Concern, protection, safety. He always wore the right costume, but this time real care arrived, not in speeches, not in image, not in a well-written statement. It arrived in people who didn't belong to Caleb. Derek had done something that proved he was no longer asking permission from the same circle that had failed him. He had called an independent medical review team, external, documented, accountable. Specialists with nothing to gain by pleasing the hospital. Professionals who didn't owe Caleb favors. Professionals who didn't owe the director fear. They moved through the hallway without drama, just urgency. No heroic flair, no grand entrance. The kind of competence that doesn't need an audience. The leader of the team, an older physician with tired eyes and a steady voice, asked for the basics. Full history, medication record, progress notes, no gaps, he said. Now. The clinical director started to explain process, limitations, sensitivity. The physician raised a hand, not rude, not loud, final. "I didn't come to debate narrative," he said. "I came to review care." That sentence cut through everything, because care is either clean or it isn't. Rosa stayed quiet, but her mind wasn't quiet. She tracked the questions, the responses, the pauses. She saw how people tried to redirect. She noticed how certain words were used to blur rather than clarify. And then she saw it. An inconsistency. Not a feeling, not a suspicion, a mismatch. She didn't announce it like a victory. She offered it the way you offer a warning. "Doctor," Rosa said softly to the leader of the external team, "that timestamp, it doesn't match what was happening." The doctor looked at her for half a second, not at her uniform, not at her job title, at her tone, at her restraint. He asked to see the screen, scrolled, read. Then he asked a question that sounded simple but opened a door you can't close quietly. "Who entered this record?" Silence. Not the kind of silence that means confusion, the kind that means someone knows. The physician turned toward the nearest officer. If there is record manipulation or inconsistent documentation in a severe pediatric case, that's not just an ethics issue, he said. That's criminal. And just like that, the story shifted. It stopped being cleaning staff versus doctors. It became what it always was: truth versus corruption. But the ending still had to be paid for. It couldn't come easy, because real justice costs something. Inside the unit, an alarm changed tone, a different sound, a sharper sound. The kind that makes every person in a hallway understand one thing even if they don't know the numbers. Danger! Nurses ran. Someone called for backup. A door closed. Voices overlapped, urgent, practiced, unafraid to sound afraid. Derek took one step toward the door and stopped. Because in there, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a donor. He was a father with no power that mattered. He pressed his forehead to the cold wall for a second, as if he could hold the world together with skin and will. "I promised her," he whispered, voice cracking in a way he hated. "I promised I'd protect our son." Rosa heard it, and she didn't judge, because she knew the pain of promising with your whole heart and still being crushed by forces you can't control. Marta moved closer, her courage shaking, but standing anyway. "If we fall apart now," she said quietly, "they'll write the story however they want." And then the turn came the right way. Not through shouting, not through someone winning an argument, through procedure being done cleanly. The external team cut interference, established direct oversight, required double verification, documented everything. The corrupt chain lost its grip, not because anyone was dramatic, but because they were suddenly being watched by people who wouldn't play along. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the leader of the external team emerged, sweat on his brow, fatigue in his shoulders, and steadiness in his voice. "He's stabilized," he said. "From this moment forward, nobody touches that child without supervision, documentation, and chain of custody procedures. If anyone tries to override this, I report it immediately." Derek didn't collapse. He didn't make a scene. But his breath changed, like the world finally let him inhale again. And the officers didn't waste that opening. "Now," the senior officer said, "we preserve evidence, we restrict access, and we begin formal questioning. No one leaves until we have names." Right there, right after the baby stabilized and the police moved, the story had its first clean victory, and that's where you speak directly to the viewer. If your heart made it here, comment "justice" and share this story with someone who needs to remember that courage changes outcomes, and subscribe, because what happens next is the kind of ending we wait our whole lives to see. Caleb saw the tide turning and attempted one more move, the last one, the one that pretends to be reasonable. He turned to the officer, voice calm, hands open, the posture of someone helping. "Officer, with respect, you're interfering with medical operations," Caleb said. "If anything worsens, you could be responsible." It was an attempt to scare the law with liability. The officer didn't flinch. "Sir," the officer replied, "you're being investigated for obstruction and attempted record tampering. Step aside." Caleb's smile tightened. "You know who I am?" he asked reflexively. Like identity could become immunity. The officer answered with a simplicity that felt like oxygen. "Today," he said, "I do." Then the chain closed. Not with one piece of evidence, but with several that fit together so tightly there was no room left for denial. A system log showing remote access initiation. An alert showing a live attempt to delete audit records, time-stamped, flagged, traced. A partial video from a secondary camera, blurry, incomplete. But catching a single detail, the distinctive watch clasp on the wrist of the person carrying a small thermal cooler during the 10-minute blackout. Marta's testimony, clear, specific, consistent. And the external team's clinical review showing the documented conduct did not match the observed condition. Log, image, witness, deletion attempt, a closed chain, an impossible to explain pattern. Derek's attorney spoke with quiet force. "Officer, we are requesting immediate preservation of all servers and access logs," he said, "and we are filing an official complaint for obstruction and fraudulent documentation." The officer nodded, already in motion. "IT supervisor," the officer said. "Freeze system access. Create a full duplicate of relevant logs, no deletions, no edits, and we collect a list of every user with admin-level permissions." The clinical director's face drained. "That will create panic," he started. Derek turned his head slowly. "The panic was already here," Derek said. "You just weren't the one feeling it." Then the arrest began. Not in a flashy way, but in a way that felt heavier than spectacle. Security collected badges. A doctor was escorted for questioning. Another staff member had access revoked in real time. The compliance officer was brought in, stunned and sweating. And the hallway's mood shifted again. The same phones that had been filming Rosa like she was a criminal were now filming cuffs like they were relief. Rosa didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk. She simply exhaled. Because she hadn't come to win. She had come to survive with her daughter. Caleb tried to salvage control one last time by turning the focus back onto Rosa, making her the loud target again, hoping the crowd would prefer a simple villain. "She's manipulating him," Caleb said sweetly, eyes on Derek. "He's grieving. He's vulnerable." Derek's face didn't move much, but his voice came out sharp with truth. "I have been vulnerable for a year," Derek said, "since I buried my wife, and you knew that. You used it." For the first time, Caleb's smile didn't hold. Not a full collapse, just a hairline crack, enough for everyone to see it. The officer stepped in. "Sir," he told Caleb, "you're coming with us." As Caleb was escorted, he leaned toward Derek low enough that only Derek could hear. "You think you won," Caleb murmured, "because you locked an elevator." Derek looked at him, and it wasn't hatred, it was clarity. "I didn't lock an elevator," Derek replied. "I opened my eyes." Caleb's gaze flickered, angry or calculating. Then he was moved forward. The hall began to loosen slowly. People started to breathe again. And in the quiet aftermath, Derek finally stood in front of Rosa and Sophia without the mask of employer and employee between them. For the first time, he looked at Rosa like she was not a uniform. He looked at her like she was a human being who had held the line when everyone else chose convenience. He looked at Sophia like she was not a complication. He looked at her like she was the reason his son was still alive. Derek lowered himself slightly. not to perform humility, but to meet Sophia where she stood. "You did something for my baby today," Derek said gently. Sophia's face tightened, like she wasn't sure it was safe to be praised. "I just didn't want him to hurt," she said. That sentence, simple, pure, hit Derek like both a wound and a cure. He closed his eyes for a second, then looked at Rosa. "I let the wrong people close to me," he said quietly, "and I almost lost the last piece of my family." Rosa's throat tightened, but she didn't let it turn into drama. She let it turn into honesty. "I just wanted to go home with my daughter," she said, "and sleep without fear." Derek nodded, and then he did something that mattered. He didn't offer a grand gesture. He offered a concrete one. "You're going home with dignity," he said. "And if you want, you're finishing what life interrupted." Rosa's eyes narrowed instinctively. "I don't want charity." Derek didn't argue. "Then it's not charity," he said. "It's justice." He asked for her information, quietly, respectfully. Not in front of the crowd, not as a show. He asked who she'd studied under, what exams she'd been unable to afford, what documentation she had, what she needed to take that final step. Rosa didn't thank him. Not yet. Because people like Rosa learn early not to believe in miracles that come with strings. But Derek didn't talk in strings. He talked in actions. Weeks passed, the investigation expanded, and justice didn't stop at one man. It moved like a wave. A review board was formed, external auditors came in, admin access was traced, financial patterns were examined. The hospital's internal culture, its habits of silence and intimidation, was forced into daylight. Some people resigned quietly. Some were terminated. Some faced charges. And in the middle of all that, the baby, Evan, stayed alive. Not by luck, by correct care, by clean oversight, by truth removing the hand that was smothering him behind the scenes. Derek didn't stop grieving. He didn't erase his wife. He kept her picture in Evan's room. He spoke her name out loud when no one was watching. He let the memory exist without embarrassment, because real love doesn't vanish just because life continues. Rosa began studying again. Nights, after Sophia fell asleep, Rosa sat at the kitchen table with textbooks and a second-hand laptop. Some nights she cried, not from weakness, but from the strange shock of having hope again. Hope can feel like pain when you've lived too long without it. She worked during the day, studied at night, took practice tests between shifts, learned to believe in her own mind again. Marta, quiet hero, once invisible, kept her job. And for the first time, she walked the halls with her shoulders slightly higher, not because she wanted recognition, because she had stopped carrying that old fear alone. 6 to 12 months later, things looked different in a way that felt earned. Evan was healthy, laughing, growing. Derek was still Derek, wealthy, powerful, but his presence had changed. He spoke less, listened more. He stopped treating people like background noise. Rosa passed her exam, not with fireworks, with trembling hands and a steady heart. The day the results came in, Sophia ran to her and asked, "Did you do it?" Rosa stared at the screen for a second, like her brain didn't want to accept kindness. Then she whispered, "I did it." Sophia hugged her so hard, Rosa had to close her eyes to hold herself together. Rosa didn't become a perfect success story. She became something better. She became herself again. And Derek didn't become a prince. He became a man who knew the cost of silence. He stayed around, but carefully. He didn't demand closeness. He didn't assume entitlement. He showed up in small ways. A ride home when Rosa worked late. A quiet check-in after a rough shift. a presence that didn't ask for applause. Sophia watched him from the side at first, because children can smell performance. But she began to trust what she saw. He returned. He stayed. He didn't disappear when the drama ended. One evening, Sophia sat on the living room floor with Derek, trying to force a stubborn puzzle piece into place. She frowned, then looked up with sudden seriousness. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked. The question wasn't about travel. It was about abandonment. Derek's chest tightened. He looked at Rosa in the doorway, saw the old fear in her eyes, fear of the world taking again. Derek turned back to Sophia, keeping his voice honest. "I don't want to leave," he said, "but I don't want to promise something I can't keep." Sophia swallowed, eyes glossy. "I just don't want to lose anybody else." Derek's voice softened. "Then I'm going to do this the right way," he said. He spoke to Rosa later, not with pressure, not with romance, but with respect. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Derek said. "I'm not trying to erase your past. I'm asking if there's a place for me in your present, slowly, properly." Rosa didn't melt. She didn't swoon. She told the truth. "My daughter is not a prize," she said. "I won't hand her to anyone." Derek nodded. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm asking permission, not claiming ownership." When the adoption process began, it was quiet and formal and terrifying in the way legal things always are to people who've been hurt by systems. A courtroom, a judge, papers, pens, words that sound cold when your heart is warm. Rosa's hands trembled because she remembered what it felt like to be threatened with paperwork. Derek looked at Sophia before signing and made a promise that wasn't grand. It was real. "I can be the person who stays," he said softly, "if you want me to." Sophia looked at Rosa first, because that's what kids do when they need safety. Rosa held her breath, then nodded once, not dramatic, not loud, just permission. Sophia turned back to Derek. "So, can I call you Dad?" she asked, voice small. Derek inhaled like he'd been underwater for a year. "If you want to," he said, voice wavering slightly. "I want to," Sophia whispered. Derek signed, and in that moment, the story reached its emotional peak. Not with luxury, not with romance, but with belonging. Later, much later, there was a small wedding. Quiet, simple, private. No attempt to bury the past. Derek spoke his wife's name with respect. Rosa honored that grief as part of the man she loved, not a rival to compete with. Love, when it's mature, doesn't replace. It adds. It builds. It becomes home. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like peace had finally settled into their lives, until the letter arrived. Not a friendly letter, not an apology, a legal notice, cold language, formal claims, threat dressed in rights. Rosa read the first line and felt her blood turn to ice, because it wasn't just someone asking for visitation. It was an accusation, clean, plausible, poisonous, that she had hidden her child, that she had been manipulated by a billionaire, that Derek was buying custody and erasing paternity. Words designed to sound believable to strangers, words designed to drag the truth back into mud. Sophia watched Rosa's face change and asked quietly, "Is it bad?" Rosa tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. "It's not the end," she said, "but it's a fight." Derek walked into the room, saw the paper, and understood immediately. Because people like Caleb rarely fall alone, because systems have echoes. Rosa looked up, fear in her eyes, but not the same fear she had in that hospital hallway. Now it was mixed with something else. Strength. "He's back," Rosa said. And he's back because someone told him. Derek took the letter, read it, and felt the old anger flare, then settle into focus. No one takes her, he said quietly. Not when the truth is alive. Rosa's voice stayed calm, but it carried iron. Then we keep the truth loud, she said, and we keep her safe. And the final thought lands like a hook you can't ignore. If he came back now, it wasn't because he suddenly loved his daughter. It was because someone whispered that the little girl who used to be invisible was worth something.